Welcome to my channel Midnight Stories, where you find horror stories that scare you. Before watching, please press like to support me in producing more stories. This helps in spreading the video and reaching more people. Thank you for your support and enjoy watching. This happened in the 1990s, 1998 to be exact. I wasn't planning on spending my summer in the middle of the Utah desert, but you know how life twists and turns. My name's Dale Corbin, and I've always had a knack for finding myself in situations I didn't sign up for. I was an insurance adjuster back then, working out of Provo. The job was about as exciting as staring at paint dry, but it paid well enough to keep me in boots and flannel shirts. What more does a man need, right? And yes, I do recognize how boring that sounds. It was late July, the kind of heat that turns your sweat to vapor before it even has the decency to dampen your skin. I got sent out to check on some property damage claims near this town called Bluff, right up against the Navajo Nation. Apparently, someone had a run-in with a creature, yes, creature, and things got messy. Folks around there were spooked, but I'd been in Utah long enough to know when locals were messing with the out-of-towner. The drive was uneventful, just the usual scrubland, dust, and wide stretches of absolutely nothing. The radio went dead about 20 miles outside Bluff, and cell service was laughable. When I finally rolled into town, it was dead quiet. Too quiet. Not in the cliché horror movie way, just that weird, thick kind of silence that makes you want to whistle or hum to break it up. I pulled into the only gas station in town, a run-down place with a single pump that looked like it had been there since the 1950s. The attendant, a weathered old man with skin like tanned leather, barely looked up when I asked for directions. His eyes, though, they told a different story. There was a wariness there, a tension that seemed out of place in such a sleepy town. "You headed out to the bird ranch?" he asked, his voice gravelly from years of cigarettes and desert dust. I nodded, surprised he knew. "That's right, got some insurance business out there." He grunted, wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag. "Word travels fast round here, especially when it's about Cecil's place." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Listen, son, whatever you hear out there, whatever you see, best not to poke around too much. Some things in this world ain't meant for understanding." I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "Come on, it can't be that bad. What, you got werewolves roaming around or something?" The old man didn't laugh. He just stared at me, his eyes hard and serious. "All I'm saying is don't go west after dark. And if you hear something that don't sound right, you best get inside and stay there." I thanked him for the advice, but inside I was rolling my eyes. These small-town superstitions were always the same, vague warnings about things that go bump in the night, designed to keep city folks on edge. I'd seen it all before, or so I thought. As I pulled out of the gas station, the sun was already dipping low on the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and red. It was beautiful, in a desolate sort of way. But there was something else, too. A heaviness in the air, like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I shook off the feeling and headed west, toward Cecil Bird's ranch. The road stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the vast emptiness of the desert. As I drove, the landscape began to change. The flat expanse gave way to jagged rock formations, their silhouettes stark against the darkening sky. They looked like ancient teeth sticking up out of the earth, weathered and worn but still menacing. The light was fading fast now, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. The old man's warning echoed in my mind, but I pushed it aside. I had a job to do, and I wasn't about to let some local ghost story get in the way of that. Finally, after what felt like hours of driving through increasingly rugged terrain, I saw lights in the distance. Cecil Bird's ranch. As I pulled up to the property, I could see a figure standing on the porch, rifle in hand. Cecil, I presumed, though in the growing darkness it was hard to make out details. I parked my car and stepped out, the crunch of gravel under my boots seeming unnaturally loud in the stillness of the night. The air was cooler now, but there was a strange heaviness to it, like the atmosphere before a storm. "You the insurance man?" The voice was gruff, unfriendly. "That's right," I called back, trying to keep my tone light. "Dale Corbin, I'm here about your claim." Cecil stepped off the porch, moving into the light cast by my headlights. He was a tall man, lean and wiry, with a face that looked like it had been carved from the very rocks that surrounded us. His eyes were hard, suspicious, and he kept his rifle pointed at the ground, but ready. "Let's get this over with," he growled, not bothering with any pleasantries. As he led me towards the paddock where the incident had occurred, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something I wasn't prepared for. The darkness seemed to press in around us, and every shadow looked like it might be hiding something sinister. Little did I know, as I followed Cecil into the night, that I was about to encounter something that would change my understanding of the world forever. Something that lurked in the shadows of this ancient land, waiting for unsuspecting fools like me to stumble into its domain. The smell hit me first, blood and something worse like rot. I'd been around enough crime scenes to know that kind of stench didn't come from a simple coyote kill. Half the cattle were missing, and the ones left behind were, well, shredded is the only word that fits. There wasn't enough left of them to fill a shoebox. Cecil didn't say much as he pointed out the damage. His hands were shaking, not with anger, but with something closer to fear. Ranchers like him didn't scare easy, so that was my first real warning that this was something bigger than just a wild animal problem. Still, I wasn't about to buy into the local superstitions. People see what they want to see when they're already scared. I crouched down by what used to be a cow's flank and tried to make sense of the bite marks. They were too big to be from a coyote, too irregular to be from a bear. The spacing between the teeth, if that's what they were, was wide enough that it didn't line up with any known predator in the area. "You see that, boy?" Cecil's voice was low, gruff. "That ain't no animal we got in these parts." Before I could respond, a noise from the edge of the property caught both our attention. It was a rustling sound, like something big moving through the brush. Cecil tensed, gripping his rifle a little tighter. "Whatever it is," he muttered, "it comes out at night." Now you'd think this was the point where I'd make some smart decision, like suggesting we leave or at least head back to the house. But no, I'm not known for doing the smart thing. I pulled out a flashlight from my bag, gave Cecil a look that I hoped communicated confidence, and started toward the sound. "You're a damn fool," he muttered, following me. The beam of my flashlight cut through the dark, but all it managed to illuminate were more rocks and scrub. The sound stopped as soon as we got close, like whatever was making it decided it didn't want to be seen. I was about to chalk it up to nerves when something moved, fast, just out of sight. A shape, low to the ground but big, bigger than anything that should have been out here. Cecil fired off a shot into the darkness, and for a split second, there was a horrible wet screech, followed by silence. Not the kind of silence you want. This was the kind that pressed down on you, heavy and thick, like the land itself was holding its breath. "What the hell was that?" I asked, though I didn't really want an answer. Cecil just shook his head, his face pale even in the dark. He motioned for us to head back to the house, and for once I didn't argue. Whatever was out there, we weren't prepared to deal with it, not with a flashlight and a bolt-action rifle anyway. As we walked back, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every shadow seemed to move, every rock looked like it might be hiding something. The desert, which had seemed so empty and lifeless during the day, now felt alive with unseen threats. Cecil's house was a sturdy old ranch-style building, the kind that had weathered countless storms and stood firm against the harsh desert climate. But as we approached, it looked small and vulnerable against the vast darkness that surrounded it. "You best come inside," Cecil said, his voice gruff, but with an undercurrent of concern. "Ain't safe out here after dark." I didn't need to be told twice. As soon as we were inside, Cecil bolted the door and drew the curtains. The interior of the house was sparse but clean, with a few well-worn pieces of furniture and walls adorned with old photographs and mounted animal heads. Under different circumstances, it might have felt cozy, but right now, it felt like a fragile shelter against whatever was lurking outside. Cecil moved to the kitchen, returning with 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. He poured generously, handing me a glass without a word. We both needed it. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, taking a grateful sip. The whiskey burned going down, but it helped steady my nerves. Cecil sank into an old armchair, his rifle never far from reach. "Started about a month ago. At first it was just a cow here and there. Thought it might be rustlers or maybe a mountain lion that had wandered down from the highlands. But then he trailed off, his eyes distant, reliving some memory that seemed to pain him. Then it got worse. Whatever this thing is, it ain't natural. It's smart, Dale, too smart. And it's getting bolder. I wanted to dismiss his fears, to fall back on rational explanations. But the image of that shape in the darkness, the sound of that inhuman screech, kept playing in my mind. I'd come here expecting to deal with exaggerated claims and superstitious locals. Instead, I found myself facing something I couldn't explain, something that defied everything I thought I knew about the natural world. "Have you reported this to the authorities?" I asked, knowing even as I said it how futile that would be out here. Cecil let out a bitter laugh. "Sheriff came out once, took a look around, said it was probably just coyotes or maybe a bear that had wandered down from the mountains. But he didn't see what I've seen, didn't hear what I've heard." We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. The house creaked and settled around us, and every sound made me tense. I found myself straining to hear anything unusual, any sign that the thing we'd encountered was out there, waiting. "You should get some rest," Cecil said finally, standing up with a groan. "Spare rooms down the hall, but I wouldn't count on much sleep. It tends to get active around midnight." I nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. The adrenaline from our encounter was wearing off, leaving me feeling drained and on edge. But even as I made my way to the spare room, I knew sleep would be a long time coming. The room was small, with a narrow bed and a single window that looked out onto the vast desert beyond. I closed the curtains tightly, not wanting to imagine what might be looking back at me from the darkness outside. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in way over my head. This wasn't just about an insurance claim anymore. There was something out there, something dangerous and unknown. And somehow, I had a sinking feeling that I was now caught up in whatever was happening here, whether I liked it or not. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with unsettling dreams. Shadows that moved with purpose, teeth gleaming in the darkness, and always, always the feeling of being hunted. I woke several times, heart pounding, convinced I'd heard something moving outside the window. But each time there was nothing but the eerie stillness of the desert night. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, I gave up on sleep altogether. I dressed quickly and made my way to the kitchen, where I found Cecil already up, looking like he hadn't slept at all. He nodded at me silently, pouring a cup of coffee that smelled strong enough to wake the dead. "Anything happened during the night?" I asked, accepting the mug gratefully. Cecil shook his head. "Not last night, but that don't mean much. It's always quiet for a few days after it's fed." The casual way he said it sent a chill down my spine. I sipped my coffee, trying to gather my thoughts. In the light of day, last night's events seemed almost dreamlike, but the gnawing fear in my gut told me it had all been very, very real. "So what's the plan?" I asked, more to break the silence than anything else. Cecil looked at me, his eyes hard. "Plan is you file your report and get the hell out of here while you still can." "This ain't your fight, city boy." I bristled at that. "Look, I came here to do a job, and I'm not leaving until I figure out what's going on. If there's something out there killing your livestock, we need to deal with it." Cecil's laugh was bitter. "Deal with it? You got no idea what you're up against. This thing, whatever it is, it ain't just some animal, it's something else, something old, and it ain't going nowhere." I was about to argue further when a noise from outside caught our attention. It was a low, mournful sound, somewhere between a howl and a scream. It echoed across the desert, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Cecil was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. "It's back," he said, his voice tight with fear, and was that resignation? I followed him to the porch, my heart pounding. The sun was just cresting the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. It should have been beautiful, but all I could focus on was the eerie stillness that had fallen over the land. "There," Cecil whispered, pointing to a rocky outcropping about a quarter mile from the house. At first I didn't see anything. Then a shadow moved. No, not a shadow, a shape. dark against the red rocks but unmistakably alive. It was big, much bigger than any animal that should be in this part of the country, and it was watching us. For a long moment we stood frozen, locked in a silent standoff with the creature. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone, vanishing behind the rocks with a speed that defied belief. "What the hell was that?" I breathed, my voice barely above a whisper. Cecil didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was heavy with a mixture of fear and something else. Respect, maybe? "That, Dale, is what's been hunting my cattle, and now, I reckon, it's hunting us." As we stood there, the reality of our situation began to sink in. We were isolated, miles from the nearest help, facing something that defied explanation. And somehow, I knew that this was only the beginning of what promised to be a long and terrifying ordeal. Little did I know then just how right I was, or how much this encounter would change the course of my life. The creature we'd glimpsed was more than just an animal. It was a harbinger of horrors to come, a gateway to a world of darkness that I never knew existed. And I, Dale Corbin, insurance adjuster from Provo, was about to be dragged into the heart of that darkness, whether I was ready for it or not. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of tension and barely suppressed fear. Cecil and I tried to go about our business as if everything was normal, but we both knew it was anything but. Every sound, every shadow seemed to hold the potential for danger. I spent most of the morning examining the damage to Cecil's property, taking photographs and making notes for my report. The carnage was even worse in the daylight. The remains of the cattle were strewn across the paddock, their bodies torn apart with a savagery that was hard to comprehend. The bite marks I'd noticed the night before were even more puzzling in the light of day. They were deep, ragged, and spaced in a way that didn't match any predator I knew of. "You see those tracks?" Cecil said, pointing to a series of indentations in the soft earth near the fence line. "Ain't like anything I've ever seen before." He was right. The tracks were bizarre, larger than a wolf's, but with an elongated shape that suggested a creature walking on two legs rather than four. I crouched down to get a closer look, feeling a chill run down my spine despite the desert heat. "Have you tried casting these?" I asked, my insurance adjuster brain kicking in despite the surreal situation. Cecil shook his head. "Tried once. Plaster wouldn't set right. It's like the ground itself don't want to hold on to the memory of this thing." I pulled out my camera and started taking photos of the tracks. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every few minutes I'd look up, scanning the rocky outcroppings that surrounded the property. But there was never anything there. Just rocks and scrub brush shimmering in the heat haze. As the day wore on, I found myself struggling to maintain my professional demeanor. This wasn't just an insurance claim anymore. It was something else entirely, something that defied rational explanation. But I had a job to do, so I pushed on, documenting everything I could. By mid-afternoon, the heat had become almost unbearable. Cecil and I retreated to the relative coolness of the house, where I spread my notes and photos across the kitchen table. "So, what's your professional opinion?" Cecil asked, his tone sardonic. I sighed, running a hand through my sweat-dampened hair. "Honestly, I don't know. This isn't like anything I've ever seen before. The damage, the tracks, none of it adds up." Cecil nodded, as if he'd expected this answer. "Told you, didn't I? This ain't no ordinary predator we're dealing with." "Then what is it?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. "Because I've got to put something in this report, and unknown creature isn't going to cut it with the higher-ups." Cecil was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost reverent. "The old-timers, they used to talk about something. A creature that lived in these parts long before white men came, something the Navajo feared. They called it the Skinwalker." I'd heard the term before, whispered in bars and around campfires, but I'd always dismissed it as just another bit of local folklore, a boogeyman story to scare tourists and keep kids in line. "You can't be serious," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I felt a twinge of doubt. After what I'd seen, could I really dismiss anything? Cecil's eyes met mine, and there was no hint of jest in them. "I've lived out here my whole life, Dale. Seen things that would turn your hair white. But this is different. It's like the land itself has turned against us. I was about to press him further when a sound from outside caught our attention. It was faint at first, barely audible over the hum of the old refrigerator. But it grew louder, a low, rhythmic thumping that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the house. Cecil was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. "It's back," he whispered, his face pale beneath his weathered tan. I followed him to the window, my heart pounding in my chest. The sun was low on the horizon now, casting long shadows across the desert. At first I didn't see anything unusual. Then movement caught my eye. Something was moving out there, weaving between the rock formations with an unnatural grace. It was too far away to make out clearly, but even at this distance I could tell it was big, much bigger than it had any right to be. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Cecil's grip tightened on his rifle. "We wait, and we pray it doesn't decide to come any closer." As the light faded and night settled over the desert, the creature continued its eerie patrol of the property's perimeter. Sometimes it would disappear from view for long stretches, only to reappear suddenly, closer than before. It was like it was testing us, probing for weaknesses. We spent a tense night huddled in Cecil's living room, taking turns watching the windows. Sleep was out of the question. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind outside set our nerves on edge. As dawn broke, bringing with it a momentary sense of relief, I knew one thing for certain: I was in way over my head. This wasn't just an insurance claim anymore. It was a fight for survival against something I didn't understand and wasn't equipped to face. But as I watched Cecil methodically check his rifle, his face set in grim determination, I realized I couldn't just walk away. Whatever this thing was, whatever was happening here, I was a part of it now. And somehow, I had to find a way to see it through. Little did I know then that this was just the beginning. The horrors we'd witnessed were merely a prelude to the darkness that was about to engulf us. And as the sun rose on another scorching desert day, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. For Cecil, for me, and for anyone else who might cross paths with the terror that stalked these ancient lands. The next few days passed in a blur of tension and mounting dread. Cecil and I fell into an uneasy routine, spending our days fortifying the house and our nights on high alert, waiting for the creature to make its next move. I'd called my office in Provo, feeding them some story about needing more time to investigate the claim. They weren't happy, but they agreed to give me another week. I didn't tell them the real reason I was staying. How could I? They'd think I'd lost my mind. On the fourth day, things took a turn for the worse. We woke to find one of Cecil's horses dead in the corral, its body mangled in a way that made my stomach turn. The attack had happened sometime in the night, but neither of us had heard a thing. The creature was getting bolder, coming closer to the house, and it was smart enough to do it without alerting us. "We need help," I said as we stood over the horse's remains. "This is beyond us, Cecil. We should call the authorities, get some experts out here." Cecil spat on the ground, his face a mask of barely contained rage and fear. "And tell them what? That we've got some kind of monster prowling around? They'll lock us up and throw away the key." He was right, of course. Who would believe us? We barely believed it ourselves, and we'd seen the thing with our own eyes. As we were arguing, a truck pulled up to the house. A man got out, tall and lean, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent a lifetime under the desert sun. He introduced himself as Jim Yazzie, Cecil's nearest neighbor, though nearest was a relative term out here. "Heard you've been having trouble," Jim said, his dark eyes scanning the property warily. "Thought I'd come see if you needed a hand." Cecil filled him in on what had been happening, leaving out some of the more unbelievable details. Jim listened silently, his expression grave. "I've been hearing things too," he said when Cecil finished. "Strange noises in the night, cattle gone missing. Thought it might be rustlers at first, but..." He trailed off, and I could see the same fear in his eyes that I'd been feeling for days. "You've seen it, haven't you?" I asked. Jim nodded slowly. 2 nights ago, was out checking my fences when I saw something. Biggest damn thing I've ever laid eyes on. Moved like nothing natural. Thought I was losing my mind. Cecil and I exchanged a look. It was almost a relief to have someone else confirm what we'd seen. It meant we weren't crazy. But it also meant that the danger was very, very real. "What do we do?" I asked, looking from Cecil to Jim. Jim's hand went to the pistol on his hip. "We hunt it down before it hunts us." The plan, such as it was simple. We'd set up a series of motion-activated cameras around the property, hoping to catch the creature on film. Then, when night fell, we'd take up positions around the ranch, armed and ready. It was a foolhardy plan, born of desperation and fear, but it was all we had. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the desert, we took our positions. Cecil was on the roof of the house, his rifle trained on the surrounding landscape. Jim and I were on opposite sides of the property, each armed with a shotgun and a walkie-talkie. The night was eerily still. No wind, no animal sounds, just the oppressive silence of the desert. Hours passed and nothing happened. The tension was unbearable. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rock looked like it might be hiding our quarry. It was nearing midnight when I heard it. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I raised my shotgun, my hands shaking. "You hear that?" I whispered into the walkie-talkie. "I hear it," Cecil's voice crackled back. "Stay alert, it's close." The growl came again, louder this time, closer. I swept my flashlight across the landscape, the beam cutting through the darkness. And then I saw it. It emerged from behind a cluster of rocks, moving with a fluid grace that belied its massive size. In the harsh light of my flashlight, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, vaguely wolf-like in shape, but far larger than any wolf had a right to be. Its fur was matted and caked with dried blood, and its eyes, God, its eyes. They glowed with an unnatural intelligence, fixing on me with a hunger that froze the blood in my veins. I tried to raise my shotgun, but my arms wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed with fear, rooted to the spot as the creature advanced. A shot rang out, the sound echoing across the desert. Cecil firing from the roof. The creature jerked, letting out a bone-chilling howl of pain and rage. But it didn't go down. Instead, it turned its attention to the house, moving with incredible speed. "Cecil!" I shouted into the walkie-talkie. "It's coming for you." I ran towards the house, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear Jim shouting more gunshots, but it all seemed distant, unreal. All I could focus on was the creature, now scaling the side of the house with impossible agility. I reached the porch just as the thing crested the roof. Cecil was backing away, his rifle raised, but he was out of room, nowhere left to go. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the creature tense, preparing to pounce. I saw Cecil's finger tighten on the trigger. And then, just as the monster leaped, a blinding light lit up the night sky. For a moment I thought it was lightning, but the light persisted, growing brighter, closer. The creature froze mid-leap, its attention drawn to the sky. And then, with a sound like thunder, something struck the ground between the house and where I stood. The shockwave knocked me off my feet. When I managed to stand, blinking spots from my eyes, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Where the light had struck, there was now a figure. Tall, impossibly tall, with skin that seemed to shimmer and shift like quicksilver. It turned its featureless face towards the creature on the roof, and I felt a wave of something, power, ancient and terrible. The creature let out a sound I'll never forget. Not a growl or a roar, but a keening wail of pure terror. And then, before any of us could react, it leaped from the roof and disappeared into the night. The silver figure turned slowly, seeming to regard each of us in turn. I felt its gaze on me, and in that moment, I understood true fear. This wasn't just some desert predator we'd been dealing with. This was something else entirely, something beyond our comprehension. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. No flash of light, no sound. It simply wasn't there anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. Cecil, Jim, and I stood frozen, trying to process what we'd just witnessed. It was Jim who finally broke the silence. What the hell was that?" he whispered, his voice shaking. I shook my head, unable to form words. Cecil climbed down from the roof, his face ashen. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but I think we just got our first glimpse of what we're really up against." As we huddled in Cecil's kitchen, nursing cups of coffee laced with whiskey, I knew that our lives had changed irrevocably. Whatever was happening here in this remote corner of Utah, it was bigger than any of us. bigger perhaps than anything we could hope to understand. But one thing was certain. We were in the middle of it now, and somehow we had to find a way to survive. The days that followed our encounter with the silver being were filled with a tense, uneasy calm. The creature, the Skinwalker, as Cecil insisted on calling it, hadn't been seen since that night. But its absence brought little comfort. We all knew it was still out there, waiting. Jim had taken to staying at Cecil's ranch. Safety in numbers, he said, though I suspected he was as afraid of being alone as the rest of us. We spent our days fortifying the house, boarding up windows and reinforcing doors. At night, we took turns standing watch, though sleep was elusive even when it wasn't our shift. It was on the third night after the incident that things took another turn. I was on watch, sitting on the porch with Cecil's rifle across my lap when I saw the lights. At first I thought I was imagining things, lack of sleep playing tricks on my eyes. But as I watched, they grew clearer. 3 points of light, moving with purposeful intent across the desert sky. I called for Cecil and Jim, and we stood together watching as the lights drew closer. They moved in perfect formation, too steady to be aircraft, too fast to be anything terrestrial. As they neared the ranch, they suddenly split apart, each light taking a different direction. One headed towards the rocky outcropping where we'd first seen the Skinwalker. Another moved towards the far end of Cecil's property. The third came straight for us. "Should we run?" Jim asked, his voice tight with fear. Cecil shook his head. "No point. If they want us, they'll find us." I gripped the rifle tighter, though I knew deep down it would be useless against whatever was coming. The light grew brighter as it approached, so bright it hurt to look at directly, and then, just as it reached the edge of the property, it winked out. For a long moment, nothing happened. We stood in tense silence, straining our eyes against the sudden darkness. Then a voice spoke. It came from everywhere and nowhere, filling our heads without passing through our ears. "You have seen what you were not meant to see," the voice said. It was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It simply was. "You have drawn the attention of forces beyond your comprehension." "Who are you?" Cecil called out, his voice steadier than I would have expected. "What do you want with us?" There was a pause as if the entity was considering its response. "We are the Watchers," it said finally. "We have guarded this world since before your kind first crawled from the oceans, and now you have stumbled into a war as old as time itself." A figure materialized before us, similar to the silver being we'd seen before, but somehow more substantial. It regarded us with eyes that glowed like distant stars. "The creature you call the Skinwalker is but a foot soldier in this war," the being continued, "a scout for forces that would consume your world and everything in it. We have held them at bay for eons, but the balance is shifting. They grow stronger, bolder, and now they have found a foothold here, in this place where the veil between worlds is thin." I felt a chill run down my spine. This was beyond anything I could have imagined when I first came to investigate Cecil's insurance claim. This was cosmic, terrifying in its implications. "What can we do?" I found myself asking. "How can we stop this?" The being turned its gaze on me, and I felt the weight of millennia in its stare. "You cannot stop it," it said simply, "but you can fight. You can stand against the darkness, and in doing so, you may buy time for your world." "How?" Jim asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We will show you," the being said. And with that, it reached out and touched each of us on the forehead. The world exploded into light and sound. Images flooded my mind. Ancient battles fought in the stars, creatures of nightmare and beauty beyond imagining. Secrets of the universe laid bare. I saw the true nature of the Skinwalker, a being of chaos and hunger given form, and I saw how to fight it. When the visions faded, I found myself on my knees, gasping for breath. Cecil and Jim were in similar states, their eyes wide with shock and awe. "You now possess knowledge that has been hidden from humanity for millennia," the being said. "Use it wisely. The fate of your world may depend on it." And with that, it was gone. The desert night returned to its usual quiet, but nothing would ever be the same again. We spent the rest of the night in stunned silence, each of us trying to process what we'd experienced. The knowledge imparted to us was overwhelming, like trying to pour an ocean into a teacup. But slowly, as the shock wore off, understanding began to dawn. We learned that the Skinwalker was not just a creature of Native American legend, but a manifestation of something far older and more terrible. It was a scout for an invading force, a force that existed in the spaces between realities. These entities, for lack of a better term, fed on fear, pain, and chaos. They sought to break down the barriers between worlds, to flood our reality with their nightmarish presence. The Watchers, as they called themselves, were our world's defenders. They had been fighting this war since the dawn of time, pushing back the invaders and maintaining the delicate balance between realities. But now, that balance was shifting. As the sun rose on a new day, Cecil, Jim, and I looked at each other with new eyes. We were no longer just three men caught up in something beyond our understanding. We were soldiers in an ancient war, entrusted with knowledge that could save or doom our world. "So," Jim said, breaking the long silence, "what do we do now?" Cecil's face was grim, but there was a determination in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. "We fight," he said simply. "We use what they've shown us and we fight." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of fear and resolve. "But how? We're just us. How can we possibly stand against something like this?" "We're not just us anymore," Cecil replied. "We've been given a gift, knowledge, power, and we're going to use it." Over the next few days, we began to explore the abilities the Watchers had awakened in us. It was like learning to use muscles we never knew we had. Jim discovered he could sense the presence of otherworldly entities, a talent that would prove invaluable in the days to come. Cecil found he could manipulate energy in ways that defied physical laws, creating barriers and weapons of pure force. As for me, I developed a kind of second sight. I could see the weak points in reality, the places where the veil between worlds was thinnest, and, with concentration, I could even glimpse the other side. We trained relentlessly, pushing ourselves to the limits of our new abilities. We knew the Skinwalker would return, and when it did, we had to be ready. It was a week after our encounter with the Watchers when Jim suddenly stiffened, his eyes going wide. "It's coming," he said, his voice tight with tension, "and it's not alone." We rushed outside, weapons at the ready. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of red and gold. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then, using my newfound sight, I looked deeper. The air seemed to ripple and twist, like heat haze on steroids. And through those distortions I could see them, dark shapes moving with predatory grace. The Skinwalker was in the lead, its form even more monstrous than I remembered. Behind it came others, creatures that defied description, all teeth and claws and hungering malevolence. "There," I said, pointing, "by the rock formation to the north, 5 of them, including our old friend." Cecil nodded grimly. "Jim, can you sense their intentions?" Jim closed his eyes, concentrating. When he opened them again, his face was pale. "They're here to open a way," he said. "A portal to their world, if they succeed." He didn't need to finish the thought. We all knew what it meant. If these creatures managed to tear open a hole between worlds, it would be the end of everything we knew. "Not if we have anything to say about it," Cecil growled. He raised his hands, and I could feel the air around us begin to thrum with energy. "Dale, find the weakest point in the veil. Jim, guide us to the best position to intercept them. It's time to show these bastards what we're made of." As we moved into position, I couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed in such a short time. A month ago, I was just an insurance adjuster from Provo, worried about nothing more serious than meeting my quotas. Now, I was preparing to face down interdimensional horrors in a battle for the fate of our world. The creatures were getting closer, their forms becoming more distinct as they neared. The Skinwalker was even more terrifying up close, its body a constantly shifting mass of fur, scales, and raw, pulsing flesh. The others were no less nightmarish, beings of shadow and flame, things with too many limbs and not enough eyes, horrors that the human mind wasn't equipped to fully comprehend. Cecil raised his hands, and a shimmering barrier of energy sprang into existence between us and the approaching monsters. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it would buy us some time. "Dale," Cecil barked, "where's the weak point?" I focused my sight, looking past the physical world to the underlying fabric of reality. And there it was, a spot about 50 yards to our right where the veil between worlds was gossamer thin. There, I pointed. That's where they'll try to break through. Jim nodded grimly. He's right. I can feel their intent. They're going to make their push there. Cecil didn't hesitate. Then that's where we make our stand. Jim, you're our early warning system. Dale, keep an eye on that weak spot. I'll handle our uninvited guests. We moved into position, our hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. The barrier Cecil had created was already starting to buckle under the assault of the otherworldly creatures. As the first of the monsters broke through, Cecil let loose with a blast of pure energy. It struck the creature head-on, sending it reeling back with a shriek that set my teeth on edge. But there were more behind it, an endless tide of nightmares made flesh. Jim called out warnings, helping us anticipate each new attack. I kept my eyes on the weak spot, ready to alert the others at the first sign of a breach. And Cecil was magnificent. He moved with a grace and power I'd never seen before, hurling bolts of energy and creating shields of force to deflect the monster's attacks. But we were outnumbered and outgunned. For every creature we managed to drive back, 2 more took its place. And all the while, I could feel the fabric of reality straining at the weak point, threatening to tear at any moment. Just when it seemed we couldn't hold out any longer, I felt a surge of something. Power, unlike anything I'd experienced before. I looked up to see 3 points of light descending from the sky. The Watchers had returned. They joined the battle without hesitation, their mere presence seeming to drive the invading creatures into a frenzy of fear and rage. With their help, we began to turn the tide. The Skinwalker, realizing its plan was failing, made one last, desperate lunge for the weak point. I saw it coming, saw the intent in its twisted form. Without thinking, I threw myself into its path. The impact was like being hit by a truck. I felt claws rake across my chest, felt teeth sink into my shoulder. But I held on, using every ounce of my newfound power to keep the creature from reaching its goal. Cecil and Jim were there in an instant, pulling the monster off me. One of the Watchers joined them, its touch reducing the Skinwalker to ash in a matter of seconds. And then suddenly, it was over. The remaining creatures fled back to whatever hellish dimension they'd come from. The weak point in reality sealed itself, the veil between worlds growing strong once more. As I lay there on the desert sand, bleeding and battered but alive, I couldn't help but laugh. We'd done it. We'd faced down the forces of chaos and won. But even as relief washed over me, I knew this was just the beginning. The war wasn't over. It would never be over. But now, at least, Earth had new defenders, and we would be ready for whatever came next. The days following our battle were a blur of pain, exhaustion, and debriefing. The Watchers stayed with us, helping to heal our wounds and strengthen the barriers between worlds. They taught us more about our new abilities, about the nature of the conflict we'd been drafted into. I learned that what we'd faced was just the tip of the iceberg. The Skinwalker and its companions were foot soldiers in a vast army of chaos. There were other incursions happening all over the world, other groups like us being awakened to their true potential. As my injuries healed, I found myself grappling with the enormity of what had happened. My old life seemed like a distant dream. How could I go back to adjusting insurance claims when I now knew the truth about the universe? How could I pretend to be normal when I could see the very fabric of reality? Cecil and Jim were struggling with similar questions. We spent long nights talking, trying to make sense of our new roles as defenders of our world. "We can't just go back," Jim said one evening as we sat on Cecil's porch watching the sunset. "Not after what we've seen, what we've done." Cecil nodded slowly. "No, we can't. But we can't abandon our lives entirely either. We need to find a balance." I knew they were right. We couldn't just disappear into the desert, spending our days waiting for the next interdimensional invasion. But we also couldn't ignore our new responsibilities. It was the eldest of the Watchers who finally provided a solution. "Your world needs protectors who understand it," it told us, "who can move among its people undetected. You will return to your lives, but you will be our eyes and ears. And when the need arises, you will be our hands." And so, a month after I'd first arrived at Cecil's ranch to investigate a simple insurance claim, I found myself driving back to Provo. But I wasn't the same man who had left. I carried with me knowledge of cosmic wars and otherworldly horrors. I had power thrumming beneath my skin, ready to be called upon at a moment's notice. I also carried a mission. The Watchers had given us the ability to sense disturbances in the fabric of reality. We were to keep watch for signs of incursion, to be the first line of defense against the forces that sought to unmake our world. As I pulled into my driveway, my old house looking small and ordinary after everything I'd experienced, I couldn't help but smile. Life was about to get very interesting. In the months that followed, I settled into a new routine. By day, I was Dale Corbin, insurance adjuster. I went to work, filed reports, lived a seemingly normal life. But at night and on weekends, I was something else, a guardian, a warrior in a war most of humanity would never know existed. Cecil, Jim, and I stayed in close contact. We'd formed a bond in that desert that went beyond friendship. We were brothers in arms now, united in our secret mission. There were other incursions, other battles. We faced horrors that would have broken us before, creatures that defied description and threatened the very foundations of our reality. But we were ready for them now. We fought, we bled, and we won. And through it all, I kept thinking back to that summer in 1998. To the insurance claim that had changed everything. Life has a funny way of taking you places you never expected to go. Sometimes those places are dark and terrifying, but sometimes they're where you were always meant to be. As I sit here now, years later, writing down this account, I can't help but wonder what the future holds. The war isn't over. It may never be over. But as long as there are people willing to stand against the darkness, there's hope. So if you're reading this and you start to notice strange things, shadows moving when they shouldn't, whispers in the quiet places, don't be afraid. We're out there, watching, waiting, ready to defend our world from whatever comes. And who knows, maybe you'll be next. Maybe you'll be the one to answer the call, to join the ranks of Earth's secret guardians. If you do, remember this. The universe is bigger, stranger, and more wonderful than you could ever imagine. And in the face of cosmic horror, human courage can work miracles. As for me, Dale Corbin, once a simple insurance adjuster from Provo, I'll be here doing my part, fighting the good fight. And if you ever find yourself in Utah facing something you can't explain, something that defies all logic and reason, well, you know who to call. Just don't expect me to file an insurance claim for it. Some damages, after all, are beyond coverage. This happened in the 1990s. Specifically, this all began in 1994. My name is Callum Hargrove, and this is the story of how my ordinary life in a small Michigan town turned into a waking nightmare that has haunted me for decades. Even now, as I sit down to finally put these events to paper, I find my hands shaking and my heart racing. But I feel compelled to share what happened, if only as a warning to others who might dismiss the unexplained or unknown. Sometimes the monsters lurking in the shadows are all too real. In 1994, I was 26 years old and living what most would consider an utterly unremarkable existence in Fennville, Michigan. It was the kind of small Midwestern town where everyone knew everyone else's business, where the biggest event of the year was the county fair, and where ambition went to die a slow, comfortable death. I had graduated from Fennville High School 8 years earlier with middling grades and even less direction. While some of my classmates had gone off to college or moved to bigger cities in search of opportunity, I had been content to stay put. I told myself it was temporary, that I was just taking some time to figure things out. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and before I knew it, nearly a decade had passed me by. I was working as a clerk at Fennville Hardware, a family-owned store that had been a fixture on Main Street for generations. The work wasn't particularly challenging or rewarding, but it paid the bills and left me with enough spare cash to indulge in my main hobbies, drinking cheap beer at Joe's Tavern with my buddies and watching sports on TV. Looking back now, I can see how stagnant my life had become. But at the time, I was comfortable in my rut. I had a routine, I had friends, I had a place where I belonged. What more did I need? My closest friends were guys I'd known since childhood. There was Ernie Decker, a boisterous character who fancied himself the life of any party. He worked as a mechanic at his uncle's auto shop and was always regaling us with outlandish stories of his alleged exploits and misadventures. Then there was Paulie Simmons, Ernie's polar opposite in many ways. Quiet and reserved, Paulie had a gift for working with his hands. He did odd jobs and handyman work around town, and there wasn't a broken appliance or busted pipe he couldn't fix. Rounding out our little group was yours truly. I suppose you could say I was the peacekeeper, the one who mediated between Ernie's wild schemes and Paulie's cautious nature. More often than not, though, I just went along with whatever harebrained idea Ernie cooked up. It was easier than arguing, and deep down I think I craved a little excitement to break up the monotony of small-town life. We were creatures of habit, our friendships forged through years of shared experiences and inside jokes. Most nights found us occupying our usual booth at Joe's, nursing beers and shooting the breeze about nothing in particular. It was a simple existence, predictable and safe. But all of that was about to change. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact moment when the comfortable predictability of my life began to unravel. It was a Friday night in early October, crisp autumn air carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. Ernie, Paulie, and I were at our usual spot in Joe's, a few pitchers deep into what should have been another forgettable evening. I remember the way the neon beer signs cast a dim, reddish glow over the weathered wood of the bar. Country music played softly from the jukebox in the corner, nearly drowned out by the chatter of the Friday night crowd. The acrid smell of cigarette smoke hung in the air, mingling with the aromas of spilled beer and greasy bar food. Ernie was in rare form that night, gesticulating wildly as he regaled us with his latest tall tale. I was only half listening, my attention drifting between the Tigers game on the TV above the bar and my own muddled thoughts. That's when Ernie said something that caught my ear and changed the course of all our lives. "Hey, you guys ever hear about that old shoe factory out on County Road 7? He asked, leaning in conspiratorially. I shrugged, vaguely recalling an abandoned building I'd driven past a few times. Paulie just shook his head silently. Ernie's eyes lit up, sensing he had a captive audience. "Well, I heard from my cousin that the place is supposed to be haunted, like seriously creepy shit going down out there." I rolled my eyes. "Come on, Ernie, ghost stories? What are we, 12? But Ernie was undeterred. "No, man, I'm serious. People have seen weird lights out there at night, and there's supposed to be these strange noises coming from inside. Some people think it's just kids messing around, but others say it's something not natural." I chuckled, taking another swig of my beer. "Right, and I'm sure your cousin's friend's sister's roommate saw Bigfoot out there too." Ernie's face fell a bit at my skepticism, but then a familiar glint appeared in his eye, the look he always got right before suggesting something monumentally stupid. "We should check it out," he said, grinning widely. "Come on, what else do we have going on tonight? It'll be an adventure." I exchanged a look with Paulie, seeing my own reluctance mirrored in his eyes. But I also felt a small thrill of excitement. As much as I hated to admit it, the prospect of doing something different, something potentially thrilling, was oddly appealing. "I don't know, Ernie," Paulie said hesitantly. "Trespassing in the middle of the night? Seems like a good way to get arrested, or hurt." But Ernie was already standing up, fishing his truck keys out of his pocket. "Don't be such a wuss, Paulie. We'll just take a quick look around. If it's boring, we'll leave. No harm, no foul." I found myself nodding along, my better judgment clouded by alcohol and the allure of a break-in routine. "Yeah, come on, Paulie, it might be fun. And if Ernie pisses himself at the first creaky floorboard, we'll have blackmail material for years." Paulie sighed, knowing he was outvoted. "Fine, but if we get caught, I'm telling the cops it was all your idea." And so, with a mix of excitement and trepidation, we settled our tab and piled into Ernie's battered pickup truck. As we pulled out of the Joe's parking lot and headed towards County Road 7, I had no idea that we were driving towards a horror beyond anything I could have imagined. The comfortable predictability of my life was about to shatter, replaced by a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. The drive out to the old shoe factory took about 20 minutes, but it felt much longer. As we left the familiar streets of Fenville behind, the world seemed to grow darker and more ominous with each passing mile. The glow of the town's lights faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by an inky blackness broken only by the occasional farmhouse or the sweep of Ernie's headlights across empty fields. Ernie kept up a steady stream of chatter as he drove, regaling us with increasingly outlandish rumors about the factory's haunted history. According to him, it had been the site of a grisly murder back in the 1950s, with the killer never caught. He claimed that workers had reported strange occurrences for years before the place finally shut down in the late 80s. Tools moving on their own, mysterious footsteps echoing through empty halls, even sightings of shadowy figures that vanished when approached. I tried to maintain a skeptical attitude, scoffing at Ernie's wild tales, but as we drove deeper into the countryside, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The darkness pressing in on all sides suddenly felt oppressive, almost alive. I found myself peering out the window, imagining shapes moving just beyond the reach of the headlights. Paulie was uncharacteristically quiet in the back seat, his face pale in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. I could tell he was regretting going along with this little expedition, but it was too late to turn back now. Finally, Ernie slowed the truck and turned onto a narrow gravel road. "This is it," he announced, an edge of excitement in his voice. "Factory should be about a half-mile down this way." The truck's suspension creaked and groaned as we bounced along the rutted road. Dense woods pressed in on either side, branches scraping against the sides of the vehicle like skeletal fingers. An owl hooted somewhere in the darkness, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet night. Then quite suddenly the trees fell away and we found ourselves in a large clearing. Ernie cut the engine, plunging us into near-total darkness. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out the looming shape of the abandoned factory. It was a massive structure, far larger than I had imagined. Moonlight glinted dully off broken windows, giving the impression of a great slumbering beast with half-lidded eyes. Weeds and saplings had sprouted up around the building's base, nature slowly reclaiming what man had abandoned. The whole place exuded an aura of decay and neglect that sent a shiver down my spine. "Well, here we are," Ernie said, his voice just a little too loud in the oppressive silence. "Let's go take a look around." We clambered out of the truck, gravel crunching under our feet. The air was cold and damp, carrying the musty scent of rotting leaves and stagnant water. I zipped up my jacket, suddenly wishing I'd worn something warmer. Ernie produced a couple of flashlights from behind the seat of his truck, handing one to me. "Always come prepared," he said with a wink. Paulie stuck close to us, his eyes darting nervously from shadow to shadow. As we approached the factory, its sheer size became even more apparent. The main building was easily 3 stories tall, with several smaller outbuildings clustered around it like pilot fish around a shark. Most of the windows were broken, leaving gaping black holes that seemed to watch us as we drew near. The front entrance was chained shut, a faded "no trespassing" sign hanging crookedly from one of the doors. But Ernie quickly found a broken window off to the side that we could climb through. He went first, then helped Paulie and me clamber over the jagged remnants of glass still clinging to the frame. The interior of the factory was like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie. Our flashlight beams cut through thick layers of dust, illuminating abandoned machinery and conveyor belts. Here and there a stray shoe or boot lay forgotten on the floor, ghostly reminders of the building's former purpose. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a steady plinking that echoed through the cavernous space. Every sound seemed magnified, the crunch of broken glass under our feet, the rustle of our clothing, even our own breathing. I found myself moving cautiously, tensed for something. I wasn't sure what. "Man, this place is creepy as hell," Ernie whispered, his earlier bravado somewhat diminished. "You guys feel that? It's like, I don't know, like something's watching us." I wanted to scoff, to brush off his comment as more of his usual nonsense, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. There was a palpable weight to the air, a sense of malevolent awareness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. We moved deeper into the factory, our flashlight beams dancing across rusted equipment and crumbling walls. Graffiti covered some surfaces, crude drawings and obscenities left behind by other trespassers, but there were older markings too, faded words and symbols that I didn't recognize. They seemed almost to shift and writhe in the uncertain light, and I quickly looked away. As we reached a junction where several hallways branched off, a sound stopped us in our tracks. It was faint at first, barely audible over the ambient noises of the decaying building. But it grew louder, more distinct, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. We froze, listening intently. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, coming from one of the darkened corridors to our left. They grew louder, closer, accompanied by a strange shuffling noise, and was that breathing? Heavy, ragged breathing, like some great beast panting in the darkness. Panic clawed at my throat. This was no phantom sound, no trick of the wind or settling building. Something was in here with us, something large and most definitely not human. "Guys," I whispered, my voice trembling, "we need to get out of here, now." But before we could move, a low, rumbling growl echoed through the hallway. It was a sound that bypassed all rational thought and struck directly at the most primitive part of my brain. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee from the predator that had just announced its presence. Then, in the beam of my flashlight, I saw it. A massive, hulking shape emerged from the shadows. It stood on two legs, but any resemblance to a human ended there. The creature was covered in thick matted fur. Its head was elongated, somewhere between a wolf and a bear, with eyes that glowed an unnatural yellow in the flashlight's beam. But worst of all were its hands, if you could call them that. They ended in wickedly curved claws that looked capable of rending flesh from bone with terrifying ease. For a moment that felt like an eternity. We stood frozen in mutual shock and horror. Then the spell broke, and chaos erupted. Ernie, in a moment of either incredible bravery or suicidal stupidity, charged at the creature with a yell. He swung his flashlight like a club, connecting solidly with the beast's head. But the blow seemed to have little effect other than to enrage it further. With a roar that shook dust from the ceiling, the monster lashed out. Its claws raked across Ernie's chest, shredding his jacket and the flesh beneath. Ernie's scream of pain galvanized me into action. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything I could use to fight this thing off. My eyes fell on a length of rusted pipe lying amidst some debris. I snatched it up, the metal rough and cold in my sweating palms. "Paulie, run!" I shouted, swinging the pipe at the creature's head. It connected with a sickening thud, and the beast staggered back a step, but only for a moment. Those glowing eyes fixed on me, filled with an intelligence and malevolence that chilled me to my core. I heard Paulie's footsteps retreating, the sound of breaking glass as he presumably dove back out through the window we'd entered. Part of me was relieved he'd gotten away. The rest of me was terrified of being left alone with this monstrosity. Ernie lay on the ground, moaning in pain. Blood pooled beneath him, black in the dim light. I knew I couldn't leave him, but I also knew that in a straight fight, this thing would tear us both apart. So I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. Not away, but deeper into the factory. I shouted and waved my arms, trying to draw the creature's attention away from my injured friend. It worked all too well. With another bone-chilling roar, the beast gave chase. I sprinted down dark hallways, vaulted over fallen machinery, my lungs burning and my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. All the while I could hear it behind me, the heavy footfalls, the snuffling breaths, the occasional crash as it barreled through obstacles I had to dodge around. I had no plan, no destination in mind. I just ran, driven by pure animal terror. But luck, if you could call it that, was with me. I burst through a set of double doors and found myself in what must have been the main production floor. Huge windows lined one wall, moonlight spilling in to illuminate rows of silent machines. More importantly, I saw a fire escape leading up to the roof. Without hesitation, I made for it. The metal stairs groaned and swayed under my weight as I scrambled upwards. Just as I reached the top, I heard the doors below crash open. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. The creature filled the doorway, its eyes locked on me with predatory focus. It bunched its powerful legs and leapt, covering an impossible distance in a single bound. Claws scrabbled against metal as it began to climb the fire escape after me. Heart in my throat, I scrambled onto the roof. It was a vast expanse of tar and gravel, broken only by ventilation shafts and the occasional skylight. I ran to the far edge, hoping desperately to find another way down. But there was nothing, just a sheer drop to the overgrown parking lot. I looked back to see the creature hauling itself onto the roof, its massive form silhouetted against the night sky. I was trapped, with nowhere left to run. In that moment, staring death in the face, a strange calm came over me. If this was how it ended, I wasn't going to cower in fear. I gripped my makeshift weapon tighter, planting my feet and preparing for one final, desperate stand. The beast stalked towards me, taking its time now that its prey was cornered. Its yellow eyes gleamed with cruel intelligence, and I could have sworn I saw something like amusement in its grotesque features. It knew it had won. But just as it tensed to spring, a sound split the night, a long, mournful howl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The creature's head snapped up, ears twitching. It hesitated, looking between me and the direction of the sound with what I can only describe as uncertainty. The howl came again, closer this time. The monster on the roof let out a low growl, but it was tinged with something I hadn't heard before: fear. With one last baleful glare in my direction, it turned and loped across the roof, disappearing over the far side with impossible speed and grace. I stood there for what felt like hours, every muscle tensed, waiting for it to return. But the night remained still and silent. Eventually, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving me shaky and nauseous. The events of the past hour crashed over me in a wave of delayed terror and disbelief. Ernie. The thought hit me like a physical blow. I had to get back to him, had to see if he was still alive. Moving on unsteady legs, I made my way back to the fire escape and began the slow, careful climb down. The factory seemed different now, the shadows deeper, every creaking floorboard a potential threat. I retraced my steps as best I could, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. When I finally reached the spot where we'd encountered the creature, I found only a large bloodstain on the concrete floor. Ernie was gone. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. Had the thing come back for him, or had he managed to drag himself away? I searched the surrounding area, calling Ernie's name in a hoarse whisper, but there was no sign of him, no trail of blood leading away, nothing to indicate where he might have gone. I don't know how long I wandered those dark halls, searching in vain for my friend. It felt like hours, but it could have been minutes. Time had lost all meaning in that place of shadows and decay. Eventually, I found myself back at the broken window where we'd entered. The sound of an idling engine caught my attention, and I peered out to see Paulie sitting in Ernie's truck, his face a mask of worry and fear. I climbed out, my legs nearly giving way as I stumbled towards the vehicle. Paulie's eyes widened as he saw me, taking in my disheveled appearance and the blood, some mine, some Ernie's, that stained my clothes. "Cal, oh thank God," he said, his voice shaking. "Where's Ernie? What happened in there?" I collapsed into the passenger seat, my mind reeling as I tried to find words to describe the horror we'd encountered. "Ernie's gone," I managed to croak out. "There was something in there, Paulie, something not human." Paulie's face paled even further. I heard noises, growling. I wanted to go for help, but I was afraid to leave in case you guys came out. "I'm sorry, I should have." I cut him off. "No, you did the right thing. If you'd gone in there..." I trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "We need to go to the police, now." Paulie nodded, putting the truck in gear. As we pulled away from the factory, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I turned to look out the back window, half expecting to see that hulking shape emerge from the shadows. But there was nothing, just the looming silhouette of the factory slowly receding into the darkness. The drive back to town was a blur. We went straight to the police station where we spent hours trying to explain what had happened. The officers were skeptical, to say the least. They clearly thought we were drunk or high, spinning some wild tale to cover up an accident or a fight gone wrong. They sent out a search party to the factory, more to humor us than out of any real belief in our story. They found the bloodstains, but no sign of Ernie or the creature. The official report chalked it up to animal attack, victim missing. But I saw the doubt in their eyes, the way they looked at Paulie and me. They thought we had done something to Ernie, that we were covering up some crime. The next few weeks were a nightmare of questioning, suspicion, and sleepless nights plagued by yellow eyes and inhuman howls. Ernie's family was devastated, oscillating between grief and anger. His mother begged us to tell her what really happened to her son. His father made thinly veiled threats, convinced we were hiding the truth. Polly and I stuck to our story, but I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. Had we really seen what we thought we saw? Or had fear and darkness played tricks on our minds? I found myself questioning my own memories, wondering if I was going crazy. But deep down, I knew the truth. The terror I had felt on that rooftop, staring into those alien eyes, was too visceral to be a hallucination. Whatever had taken Ernie was real, and it was still out there. As the weeks turned to months with no sign of Ernie, life in Fenville slowly began to return to normal. People stopped talking about the incident in hushed whispers when Polly or I walked by. The police filed Ernie's case away as an unsolved disappearance, but for me, nothing would ever be normal again. I found myself unable to sleep without a light on, jumping at every unexpected sound. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of that inhuman howl ringing in my ears. I took to carrying a knife everywhere I went, though I knew it would be useless against the thing I'd encountered. Polly withdrew into himself, rarely leaving his house except to go to work. When I did see him, there was a haunted look in his eyes that I recognized all too well. We never spoke about that night, but the weight of our shared secret hung between us like a physical presence. As for me, I threw myself into research, spending countless hours at the library poring over old newspapers and local history books. I was looking for any clue, any similar incident that might shed light on what we'd encountered. But all I found were vague rumors and unsubstantiated folklore, nothing concrete enough to validate our experience. I became obsessed with the factory, driving out there at odd hours to sit in my car and watch the building. I never saw anything out of the ordinary, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me back, biding its time. It was during one of these vigils, about 6 months after that fateful night, that everything changed again. I was parked on the access road, binoculars trained on the factory's broken windows, when movement caught my eye. At first I thought it was just shadows playing tricks on me, but then I saw it clearly. A figure moving inside the building. My heart raced as I fumbled for the flashlight I kept in the glove compartment. I flicked it on, aiming the beam at the window where I'd seen the movement. For a split second I caught a glimpse of a face, pale, gaunt, with wild eyes that reflected the light like an animal's. Then it was gone, vanishing back into the darkness of the factory. I sat there, frozen in shock and disbelief. It hadn't been the creature. The face had been human, or at least humanoid. But there was something profoundly wrong about it, something that sent chills down my spine. Before I could gather my wits, a sound split the night. That same mournful howl I'd heard on the rooftop 6 months ago. It was answered by another howl, then another, until the air was filled with a chorus of inhuman voices. I started the car with shaking hands, tires squealing as I sped away from the factory. My mind was reeling. What had I just seen? Were there more of those creatures? And who, or what, was that figure in the window? I drove straight to Polly's house, pounding on his door until he answered, bleary-eyed and confused. When I told him what I'd seen, the color drained from his face. "We have to go back," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. "We have to know what's going on out there." Paulie shook his head vehemently. No way, Cal. We barely made it out alive last time. Whatever's in that place, we need to stay far away from it." But I couldn't let it go. The need for answers, for some kind of resolution to the nightmare we'd been living, had become all-consuming. "Fine," I said. "I'll go alone if I have to." Paulie's shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew me well enough to know I meant it. "Give me 5 minutes," he sighed. "But I swear, Cal, if we die out there, I'm going to kill you." As we drove back towards the factory, neither of us spoke. The weight of what we were about to do pressed down on us, making the air in the car feel thick and oppressive. I tried to steel myself for whatever we might find, but nothing could have prepared me for the horrors that awaited us in that abandoned building. Little did I know our return to the factory that night would set in motion a chain of events that would not only change our lives forever, but would uncover a dark secret that had been festering in the heart of Fenville for generations. The truth, as I would soon discover, was far more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. The factory loomed before us, a hulking silhouette against the star-strewn sky. As I cut the engine, the silence seemed to press in on us from all sides. Paulie's breathing was rapid and shallow beside me. his fear a palpable thing in the confined space of the car. "We don't have to do this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We could just drive away, pretend we never came back here." Part of me wanted to agree, to turn the key and speed away from this place of nightmares. But a larger part, the part that had been consumed by the need for answers these past 6 months, wouldn't let me. "I have to know, Polly," I replied. "I have to understand what happened to Ernie, don't you?" He didn't respond, but I saw the conflict in his eyes. After a long moment, he gave a terse nod and reached for the door handle. We stepped out into the cool night air, gravel crunching under our feet. I'd come prepared this time. Flashlights, a crowbar, even a can of pepper spray, though I doubted it would do much good against the creature we'd encountered before. Polly clutched a baseball bat in white-knuckled hands, his eyes darting nervously from shadow to shadow. As we approached the factory, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into the maw of some great beast. The broken windows gaped like jagged teeth, the wind whistling through empty halls sounding almost like labored breathing. We found a different entry point this time, a loading dock door that hung askew on its track. It took both of us to lift it enough to slip underneath. The sound of metal scraping against concrete seemed deafening in the quiet night, and I winced, half expecting to hear an answering howl from the depths of the building. But there was only silence as we made our way into the factory proper. Our flashlight beams cut through the gloom, revealing scenes of abandonment and decay. Everything was as I remembered it. The rusted machinery, the scattered debris, the ever-present feeling of being watched. We moved cautiously, every sense straining for any sign of danger. I led us towards the area where I'd seen the figure in the window, trying to ignore the way my heart pounded in my chest. As we neared the spot, a new smell hit me, something rank and organic underneath the usual musty odor of the abandoned building. It reminded me of roadkill left too long in the sun, with an underlying note of something I couldn't quite place. "You smell that?" I whispered to Polly. He nodded, his face a mask of disgust. We rounded a corner and I stopped short, my breath catching in my throat. The beam of my flashlight had fallen on something that didn't belong, a crude nest of sorts made from torn fabric and what looked disturbingly like animal pelts. And in the center of it all, gleaming white in the harsh light, was a pile of bones. Polly made a choked sound beside me. "Are those human?" he asked, his voice trembling. I stepped closer, fighting back a wave of nausea. Most of the bones were indeed animal, deer by the look of them, but mixed in among them were others that were unmistakably human. A shattered femur here, the curve of a rib there, and perched atop the grisly pile, grinning at us with empty eye sockets, was a human skull. "Oh God," Polly moaned. "Oh God, Cal, we need to get out of here. We need to call the police, the FBI, somebody." I was about to agree when a sound froze us both in place, the scrape of claws on concrete coming from somewhere behind us. We whirled around, flashlights scanning wildly, but saw nothing but shadows. Then from the darkness came a voice. It was rough, guttural, as if human speech was a foreign concept to whatever was speaking. "You came back," it growled. My blood ran cold. The creature we'd encountered before hadn't spoken. What new horror was this? A figure emerged from the shadows, and I had to stifle a scream. It was humanoid, but only barely. Its body was a patchwork of fur and bare, scarred skin. Its face was elongated, somewhere between human and canine, with yellow eyes that glowed in the darkness. But worst of all was the intelligence I saw in those eyes. A cold, calculating awareness that was far more terrifying than bestial rage. "What are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice sounding small and frightened even to my own ears. The creature's mouth twisted into what might have been a smile, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "We are the forgotten," it said. "The changed. The ones your kind abandoned." More shapes were emerging from the shadows now, similar to the first, but each uniquely horrifying. Some were more animal than human, running on all fours with elongated limbs. Others stood upright, their bodies twisted and malformed as if caught mid-transformation. Polly and I backed away, our weapons feeling pathetically inadequate in the face of this nightmare horde. "What do you want?" Polly asked, his voice cracking with fear. The first creature, clearly the leader, stepped forward. "Want?" it snarled. "We want what was taken from us. Our humanity, our lives. It gestured around at the decaying factory. This place made us. Your kind made us, and then left us to rot. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. Made you? How? What happened here? The creature's eyes narrowed. Experiments, it spat. Your government playing God, trying to create the perfect soldier. But we were too perfect, too dangerous. So they abandoned us, left us to die. But we survived. We adapted. And now, we hunt. A chill ran down my spine as the pieces started to fall into place. The factory's sudden closure, the rumors of strange goings-on, the disappearances over the years. It all made a horrifying kind of sense. Your friend, the creature continued, its yellow eyes boring into me. He was strong. He fought well. But in the end, he joined us. No, I whispered, not wanting to believe it. But even as I denied it, I knew it was true. The figure I'd seen in the window, the wild eyes reflecting my flashlight. Ernie? From the back of the group, a familiar voice called out, Hey Cal, Polly, long time no see. The crowd of monsters parted and a figure stepped forward. It was Ernie, or what was left of him. His body was twisted, partially covered in patchy fur. His face was elongated, teeth too sharp to be human, but his eyes, God, his eyes were still his own, filled with a mixture of pain, anger, and something else. Hunger. Ernie, Polly choked out. What happened to you? Ernie's mouth twisted into a grotesque approximation of his old grin. I evolved, Polly. These guys, they saved me, made me stronger, better. He flexed a clawed hand. You could join us too, you know, both of you. Be part of something greater. I felt Polly tense beside me, could practically hear the gears turning in his head. For a moment I was terrified he might actually consider Ernie's offer. But then he gripped his bat tighter and took a step back. No, Polly said, his voice surprisingly steady. This isn't right, Ernie. This isn't you. We can get you help. We can... Ernie cut him off with a snarl that was more animal than human. Help? You want to help me? I'm beyond help, Polly, beyond humanity. And soon you will be too. The creatures began to close in around us, their eyes gleaming with predatory intent. I could smell their rancid breath, hear the scrape of claws on concrete. We were outnumbered, outmatched, with nowhere to run. In that moment of terror, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe it was the culmination of months of fear and uncertainty. Whatever it was, it gave me a clarity I'd never experienced before. I raised the crowbar, my voice steadier than I felt. Stay back, I warned. We don't want to hurt you, but we will if we have to. The leader of the creatures, I couldn't bring myself to think of it as human, let out a harsh, barking laugh. Hurt us? You have no idea what we're capable of, little man. Your pathetic weapons can't harm us. As if to prove its point, it lunged forward with impossible speed, batting the crowbar from my hand as if it were a toy. I stumbled back, pain lancing through my arm from the force of the blow. Polly swung his bat, connecting solidly with the creature's head, but it barely seemed to notice, turning its yellow eyes on him with a look of almost bored amusement. Run, I shouted, grabbing Polly's arm and yanking him towards the nearest exit. We sprinted through the darkened factory, the sound of inhuman howls and pounding feet close behind us. I had no plan, no destination in mind beyond away. We ducked under machinery, vaulted over debris, our lungs burning and hearts pounding. But no matter how fast we ran, the creatures seemed to be right on our heels. We burst through a set of double doors and found ourselves in a large open area, the main production floor. Moonlight filtered in through broken skylights, casting eerie shadows across rows of silent machines. There, Polly gasped, pointing to a metal staircase leading up to a catwalk that ran the length of the room. We made for it, taking the steps two at a time. The catwalk swayed alarmingly under our weight as we ran. Below us I could see the creatures pouring into the room, their eyes glowing in the dim light as they searched for us. We reached the end of the catwalk only to find our path blocked by a collapsed section of roof. Trapped, we turned to face our pursuers. They came in a wave, loping along the catwalk with inhuman grace. At the forefront was Ernie, or the thing that had once been Ernie. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the friend I had known, but it was quickly subsumed by an animal hunger that chilled me to my core. Last chance, guys, Ernie growled. Join us willingly or we take you by force. Either way, you're one of us now. I looked at Polly, saw the same mix of terror and resolve I felt mirrored in his eyes. We both knew there was only one way this could end. "I'm sorry, Ernie," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry we couldn't save you." Then, with a shared nod of understanding, Polly and I did the only thing we could. We jumped. The fall seemed to last forever. I saw the creatures lunging for us, their claws grasping at empty air. I heard their howls of frustration echoing off the factory walls. And then there was only the rush of wind and the rapidly approaching floor. I hit hard, pain exploding through my body. For a moment everything went black. When I came to, I was lying in a heap of broken wood and metal, every inch of me screaming in agony. But I was alive. Next to me, Polly groaned. He was bloodied and battered, but conscious. Above us, the creatures paced along the catwalk, snarling in frustration. They seemed reluctant to follow us down, perhaps wary of injuring themselves. "We need to move," I gasped, struggling to my feet. My left arm hung uselessly at my side, likely broken. "Can you walk?" Polly nodded grimly, hauling himself up with a pained grunt. We limped towards the exit, expecting at any moment to feel claws tearing into our backs. But we made it to the door unmolested, bursting out into the cool night air. We didn't stop running until we reached my car, collapsing into the seats with ragged breaths. As I fumbled with the keys, I saw movement at the factory entrance. The creatures stood there, watching us. But they made no move to pursue. I gunned the engine and sped away, gravel spraying from beneath the tires. In the rearview mirror, I watched the factory recede into the distance, taking with it the last remnants of the life I had known. We drove in silence, both of us too shell-shocked to speak. It wasn't until we hit the outskirts of town that Paulie finally broke the silence. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice hollow. I shook my head, wincing at the pain the movement caused. I don't know who would believe us, and even if they did, what could they do against that? The weight of our situation settled over us like a shroud. We had uncovered a horror beyond imagination, a secret that threatened not just our town, but potentially the entire world. And we were powerless to stop it. As we pulled into the hospital parking lot to get our injuries treated, I made a decision. "We have to leave," I said. "Get as far away from here as we can. Whatever's happening in that factory, whatever those things are, we can't fight them." Paulie nodded slowly, his eyes haunted. "But they'll keep killing, won't they? Keep changing people." "I know," I replied, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "But what else can we do?" We lapsed back into silence as we waited for the emergency room staff to attend to us. But even as the doctors patched up our physical wounds, I knew that the real damage, the psychological scars of what we'd witnessed, would never truly heal. In the days that followed, we told everyone that we'd been in a car accident. It was easier than trying to explain the truth. We made plans quickly and quietly, selling what we could and packing the rest. Within a week, we were ready to leave Fenville behind forever. The night before we left, I drove out to the factory one last time. I don't know what I expected to see. Maybe part of me hoped it had all been some elaborate nightmare. But as I sat there in the darkness, I saw movement in the windows. Yellow eyes gleamed in the moonlight, watching me, waiting. I drove away with a heavy heart, knowing that I was abandoning my home, my friends, everything I had ever known. But I also knew that staying meant certain death, or worse. Paulie and I left town the next morning, heading west with no real destination in mind. We rarely spoke about what had happened, but the memories haunted our dreams and colored every interaction we had. Years passed. We drifted from town to town, never staying in one place for too long. Always looking over our shoulders, always wondering if today would be the day they found us. And sometimes on quiet nights when the wind was just right, I could swear I heard a distant howl. A reminder that the nightmare we'd left behind in Fenville was still out there, still hunting, still waiting for the day when we would rejoin the pack. But that's a story for another time. For now, let this serve as a warning. There are things in this world that defy explanation, horrors lurking in the shadows of abandoned places. And sometimes the monsters wear familiar faces. So if you ever find yourself in a small Midwestern town and you hear stories about an old factory where strange things happen at night, do yourself a favor. Keep driving. Don't look back. And whatever you do, don't go investigating. Because once you've seen what lurks in the darkness, you can never unsee it. And it will never, ever stop hunting you. This happened in the 1990s. It was 1998, and I found myself standing in the middle of the Trinity Alps wilderness in California. My name's Elias Rutledge, and I'm the kind of guy who always thinks hiking solo is a great idea, until it's not. I'd been coming out here for years, maybe trying to escape the grind of life or whatever, and this time was no different. The deep forests and towering peaks were usually enough to help me clear my head. Sort out whatever baggage I was carrying at the time. The crisp autumn air nipped at my face as I adjusted the straps of my well-worn backpack. The weight of it settled comfortably against my spine, a familiar pressure I'd grown accustomed to over years of solo trekking. The trailhead stretched out before me, a narrow path disappearing into the dense forest that blanketed the lower slopes of the Trinity Alps. I'd taken a week off work, desperate to shake the suffocating feeling that had been building up for months. The monotony of my job, the endless cycle of bills and responsibilities, it all felt like it was slowly crushing me. Out here, though, among the towering pines and rugged peaks, I could breathe again. Or at least that's what I told myself as I took my first steps into the wilderness. The trail started off easy enough, a gentle incline that wound its way through stands of Douglas fir and ponderosa pine. Their branches reached overhead, creating a natural canopy that dappled the forest floor with shifting patterns of light and shadow. The familiar scent of pine needles and damp earth filled my nostrils, a smell that always brought a sense of calm washing over me. As I hiked deeper into the wilderness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. At first, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The forest looked the same as it always had, ancient trees stretching towards the sky, undergrowth rustling in the gentle breeze. But then it hit me. The sound, or rather the lack of it. There were no animals. None. Not a single bird call, no rustling in the bushes. And look, I'm not some paranoid nut, but after a while, that kind of quiet messes with you. I kept thinking I'd hear something soon, maybe a bear off in the distance, though I'd honestly rather hear nothing than that. But it was just silence. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just an off day. Animals have their own patterns, their own reasons for being quiet. But as the hours ticked by and the silence persisted, an uneasiness began to creep into my gut. I'd been coming to these mountains for over a decade, and I'd never experienced anything like this. The trail ahead of me snaked through dense pines, disappearing over a ridge that led to a small clearing where I'd planned to set up camp for the night. The sky was still a dull gray, typical for this time of year, and I figured I'd at least have another few hours of daylight. That's when I noticed it. A half-buried tarp in the dirt just off the trail, covered in what looked like dried mud and leaves. Curiosity got the better of me, so I crouched down and pulled it back, half expecting to find some old camping gear someone forgot to take with them. What I saw instead wasn't gear, it was bones, human bones. I'm no forensic expert, but I knew enough to recognize the skeletal remains of at least 2 people. The bones were picked clean, almost like they'd been left out for scavengers for months. Except there weren't any animals in this area, remember? No birds, no signs of life. I don't know why, but my first instinct was to look around like whoever or whatever did this might still be nearby. A shiver crawled up my neck. It was the first time in years that I felt like I didn't belong out here. You see, I've always prided myself on being comfortable in the wilderness, but this was different. This wasn't nature being cruel. This was something else entirely. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the grisly remains. The bones were scattered haphazardly, as if whatever had done this hadn't bothered with any sort of ritual or purpose. It was just carnage. I noticed scraps of fabric clinging to some of the bones, remnants of clothing, I assumed. A glint of metal caught my eye, and I realized it was a watch, still clasped around one of the wrist bones. The face was cracked, frozen at 3:17. I left the tarp as I found it, pulled out my map, and reconsidered the route. Sure, it was stupid not to call it in, But there wasn't cell service out here, and the nearest ranger station was hours away by foot. What was I going to do, pack it in and hike back? Not a chance. Besides, if I was honest, part of me was morbidly fascinated. Yeah, I know. That probably says more about me than I care to admit. I pressed on, figuring I could reach the clearing, set up camp, and decide what to do in the morning. The weight of what I'd seen didn't settle in right away. It was more like a nagging itch at the back of my mind, something I couldn't scratch, but couldn't forget either. As I continued along the trail, the silence seemed to grow even more oppressive. Every snapping twig under my boots, every rustle of my backpack, seemed amplified in the stillness of the forest. I found myself holding my breath at times, straining to hear anything, but there was nothing. Just the sound of my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Shadows deepened as the day wore on, and I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching me from the darkness between the trunks. More than once I spun around, certain I'd catch a glimpse of something moving in my peripheral vision. But there was never anything there. Just more trees, more silence. By the time I reached the clearing, the sun had started dipping behind the ridgeline, casting long, stretched-out shadows across the ground. The whole area was ringed with ancient trees that seemed to close in on me the longer I looked at them. They were unnaturally still, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I set up my tent with practiced efficiency, though my hand shook slightly as I drove the stakes into the ground. The routine of it helped calm my nerves a bit, but I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me like a shroud. As I worked, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something. But the clearing remained empty, save for the lengthening shadows and the whisper of wind through the leaves. As night fell, the darkness seemed to press in on all sides. I lit a small campfire, more for comfort than warmth, and huddled close to its flickering light. The flames cast dancing shadows on the surrounding trees, and more than once I thought I saw shapes moving just beyond the circle of firelight. But whenever I looked directly, there was nothing there. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination running wild after finding those bones. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The forest felt wrong, hostile even, like it was rejecting my presence. I'd never felt so alone, so vulnerable in all my years of hiking. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I tossed and turned in my sleeping bag, every creak of the tent in the wind jolting me awake. And always there was that suffocating silence. No owls hooting, no distant howl of a coyote, just the oppressive quiet and the growing certainty that I wasn't alone out here. As I lay there in the darkness, my mind kept returning to those bones I'd found. Who were they? How long had they been out here? And most importantly, what had happened to them? The questions swirled in my head, each one more unsettling than the last. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were old bones from some long-ago tragedy. But deep down I knew that wasn't true. The watch had been too modern, the fabric too fresh. It was in those quiet hours of the night as I stared up at the canvas of my tent that I first heard it. A sound, barely audible, like heavy breathing, deep and animalistic. But it wasn't coming from a bear or a mountain lion. No, this was something different, more deliberate, calculated. I held my breath, straining my ears to catch it again. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then it came again, closer this time. A low, rumbling breath that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath me. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure whatever was out there must be able to hear it. Now I wasn't armed, not for a lack of trying. I had a beat-up old rifle I used for protection on these trips, but it crapped out on me just before I left. I figured I'd be fine with some pepper spray and a pocket knife. After all, who was I going to run into out here? Turns out that was a mistake, a big one. As the night wore on, the sound grew louder, coming from the edge of the clearing right where the trees thickened into a dense wall of shadows. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, every muscle tense, ready to... What? Run? Fight? I had no idea. All I knew was that something was out there, something big, and it was getting closer. The hours crawled by, each minute feeling like an eternity. I didn't dare leave the tent, but I also knew that the thin fabric would offer no protection if whatever was out there decided to attack. As the first faint light of dawn began to filter through the trees, the sounds finally faded away. But the relief I felt was short-lived, because now, in the growing light, I could see the tracks, massive, misshapen prints in the soft earth around my campsite. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen before, too big for a bear, too elongated for a mountain lion. Whatever had made them had circled my tent all night, coming close enough at times that I could have reached out and touched it through the canvas. With shaking hands, I broke down my camp as quickly as I could. The silence of the forest was still there, but now it felt expectant, as if the whole wilderness was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I shouldered my pack and set off down the trail, my eyes constantly scanning the trees around me. I hadn't gone more than a mile when I saw it, or rather, part of it, the outline of something huge, at least 8 feet tall, moving between the trees. Whatever it wasn't walking upright. It was slinking, moving low to the ground like a predator, muscles rippling under thick, matted fur. I froze, my brain scrambling to piece together what I was looking at. The creature's head was massive, shaped like a wolf's, but too elongated, almost like someone had stretched out the features into something grotesque. Its back legs bent unnaturally, propelling it forward with a predatory grace that didn't belong in the modern world. I'm no hero. I've got no shame in admitting that. So when it turned its head toward me, its nostrils flaring as if it was smelling the air, I did the only thing that made sense. I bolted. My legs carried me faster than I thought possible, weaving through the trees as I retraced my steps back toward the trail. But the creature was faster, and I could hear it closing in. Each time its heavy paws hit the ground, it sent tremors through the earth, like the whole forest was quaking under its weight. I didn't look back, not once. I couldn't. There wasn't time. But then the scream, no, not a scream, a cry of pain ripped through the air, and I realized I wasn't alone. Someone else had been out here, maybe ahead of me on the trail, and now they were being torn apart. The sound of it chilled me to my core. It was a scream of pure terror and agony, the kind of sound a person makes when they're facing something beyond their worst nightmares. For a moment I hesitated. Should I try to help? But self-preservation kicked in and I kept running. The guilt of that decision would haunt me for years to come. I rounded a bend, skidding to a stop when I saw the source of the scream. A man, his body twisted in unnatural angles, his chest torn open, lay just off the trail, barely alive. He gasped, struggling to form words as blood bubbled up from his throat. His eyes were wide with terror, darting around frantically before locking onto mine. He managed one word before the light left his eyes. Run. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran until my lungs burned, my legs aching with every step. The creature was still behind me, closer now. Its breathing was louder and more frantic, like it was excited, like it was enjoying the chase. The forest blurred around me as I pushed myself harder than I ever had before. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging cuts, but I barely felt them. All that mattered was putting distance between myself and that thing. As I ran, my mind raced with questions. What was that creature? How long had it been out here? Was it responsible for the bones I'd found? But there was no time to dwell on these thoughts. Survival was the only thing that mattered now. I could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush behind me, getting closer with each passing second. Its breath came in ragged snarls, hungry and eager. I knew I couldn't outrun it forever. I needed a plan, and fast. Ahead, the trail split. One path led down into a ravine while the other climbed steeply up the mountainside. In a split-second decision, I veered onto the uphill path. My legs screamed in protest as I pushed myself up the incline, but I hoped the steep terrain might slow the creature down. As I climbed, loose rocks skittered down the slope behind me. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. The creature was right there, so close I could see the saliva dripping from its massive jaws. Its eyes, a sickly yellow color, were fixed on me with an intelligence that seemed impossible for an animal. Just when I thought my legs would give out, I spotted a narrow crevice in the rock face ahead. It was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but it was my only chance. With a final burst of energy, I lunged for the opening, scraping my arms and shoulders as I forced my way inside. The creature slammed into the rock behind me, its claws scrabbling at the stone as it tried to reach me. I pressed myself as far back into the crevice as I could, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The monster's foul breath washed over me as it snapped and snarled, trying to force its massive head into the narrow opening. For what felt like hours, I huddled in that crevice, watching as the creature tried again and again to reach me. Its claws left deep gouges in the rock, and I knew that if it managed to get even one of those massive paws inside, I was done for. As the light began to fade, the creature's attempts grew less frenzied. It paced back and forth in front of the crevice, those intelligent eyes never leaving mine. It was waiting me out, I realized. It knew I'd have to come out eventually. Night fell, and still the creature waited. I was exhausted, thirsty, and terrified beyond anything I'd ever experienced. But I knew that the moment I let my guard down, the moment I succumbed to sleep, it would be over. So I forced myself to stay awake, my eyes locked on the shadowy form of the monster just feet away from me. As the hours crawled by, my mind began to play tricks on me. The darkness seemed to shift and move, taking on grotesque shapes. More than once I thought I saw other creatures joining the first, circling the entrance to my hiding place. But when I blinked, there was only the one, its yellow eyes gleaming in the moonlight. It wasn't until the first light of dawn began to creep over the mountaintops that the creature finally moved away. It gave one last baleful look in my direction before melting into the shadows of the forest. I waited, hardly daring to breathe, for what felt like another eternity before I finally crawled out of the crevice. My body was stiff and sore, my clothes torn and bloodied from my frantic flight. But I was alive. For now, I knew I couldn't stay here. The creature would be back, and next time I might not be so lucky. With shaking legs, I started back down the mountain. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of fear through me. I kept expecting to see that monstrous form lunging out at me from behind a tree. But the forest remained quiet, almost unnaturally so. When I broke through the tree line, the ranger station was a welcome sight in the distance. But I knew I wouldn't make it before that thing caught up to me. I stumbled into a clearing, my legs barely able to support me after the ordeal of the night. As I surveyed my surroundings, my blood ran cold. The ground was littered with old camping gear, tents, sleeping bags, and more bones. It was a graveyard, a killing ground. This thing had been here for years, picking off anyone unlucky enough to cross its path. The realization hit me like a physical blow. How many people had met their end here? How had this gone unnoticed for so long? The bones were scattered everywhere, some bleached white by the sun, others still with scraps of decaying flesh clinging to them. The stench of death hung heavy in the air, a sickly, sweet odor that made my stomach churn. I stumbled through the clearing, my eyes darting from one grisly scene to another. There were backpacks torn to shreds, their contents spilled across the ground. Tattered clothing fluttered in the breeze, still caught on branches, as if their owners had been yanked away mid-stride. And everywhere, there were bones. As I moved through this macabre tableau, I began to notice details that chilled me even further. Some of the bones showed signs of having been gnawed on, with deep grooves left by massive teeth. Others were cracked open, the marrow extracted. This wasn't just killing for the sake of it. This was feeding. I didn't know what else to do. I grabbed a metal rod from one of the old tents and turned, ready to face whatever was coming. The weight of it in my hands was reassuring, even though I knew it would be little use against the monster I'd seen. But it was something, at least, a way to go down fighting if it came to that. The silence of the forest was suddenly broken by the sound of heavy breathing. It was back. The creature emerged from the tree line, its massive frame blotting out the last of the daylight. It stalked toward me, its lips pulled back in a twisted snarl, exposing rows of teeth that looked more suited for ripping apart prehistoric beasts than anything in this world. Time seemed to slow as I faced the creature. Its yellow eyes locked onto mine, and I saw something there that I hadn't expected. Intelligence. This wasn't just some mindless beast. There was calculation in those eyes, a cold, alien intellect that seemed to be assessing me. I raised the rod, knowing it wouldn't be enough, but at least I wouldn't go down without a fight. The thing lunged at me, its claws outstretched, and that's when the gunshot rang out. 1, 2, 3. The creature recoiled, its body jerking with each hit. I turned to see an old man, rifle in hand, standing at the edge of the clearing. He didn't say a word, just fired again and again until the thing finally collapsed, its massive form crumpling into the dirt. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, the metal rod still clutched in my shaking hands, as the old man walked up to the body of the creature. He nudged it with his boot, then spat on the ground. "We don't talk about these things," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "You tell anyone and no one's going to believe you anyway." With that, he turned and walked off, leaving me there with the dead creature, the bones, and the weight of what I'd just witnessed. I stared at the creature's body, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was like nothing I'd ever encountered before, part wolf, part bear, but with features that belonged to neither. Its fur was matted and patchy, revealing leathery skin underneath that seemed almost reptilian in texture. The claws that had so nearly ended my life were wickedly curved and impossibly sharp. As the adrenaline began to wear off, the full impact of what had happened hit me. My legs gave out and I sank to the ground, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. I don't know how long I sat there, surrounded by the evidence of countless deaths, including the creature that had caused them. Eventually, I managed to pull myself together enough to stand. I knew I needed to get out of there, to return to civilization and... what? Report what had happened? Who would believe me? The old man's words echoed in my mind. "We don't talk about these things." I gathered what was left of my gear and began the long trek back to the trailhead. Every step was an effort. My body pushed well beyond its limits, but the fear of what lay behind me kept me moving forward. As I hiked, my mind raced with questions. What was that creature? How long had it been out here? And who was that old man? He seemed to know about the monster, seemed prepared for it. Were there others? The questions piled up, each one more unsettling than the last. The next day I hiked back to civilization, my mind racing with everything I'd seen. When I finally reached the ranger station, I stood outside for a long time, debating what to do. In the end, I went in and filed a report, telling them about the body I'd found on the trail. But I left out the part about the creature. The ranger gave me a look, nodded, and said they'd send someone out to check. I never went back to the Trinity Alps again. The forest isn't mine anymore. It belongs to whatever's left out there. And maybe, just maybe, that old man was right. But then again, I've always been terrible at following advice. The days and weeks that followed my return from the Trinity Alps were a blur of sleepless nights and paranoid days. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that at any moment that creature, or others like it, might come bursting through my window. Every shadow seemed to move, every noise in the night sent my heart racing. I tried to go back to my normal life, to my job and my routines, but nothing felt the same. How could it? I'd seen something that shouldn't exist, something that challenged everything I thought I knew about the world. And I couldn't talk to anyone about it. I considered reaching out to the old man who had saved me, but I had no idea who he was or how to find him. And even if I did, would he be willing to talk? His parting words suggested otherwise. As the months passed, I found myself obsessively researching the Trinity Alps area. I scoured newspaper archives for reports of missing hikers, unexplained deaths, anything that might be connected to what I'd seen. And I found more than I expected. Over the years, dozens of people had gone missing in that area. Most were written off as tragic accidents, hikers who got lost, climbers who fell. But now, knowing what I knew, I saw a pattern. The disappearances clustered around certain areas, certain times of the year. It was like looking at a predator's hunting ground. I started making notes, compiling a file of everything I could find. Maps marked with the locations of disappearances, timelines of when they occurred, even sketches I made trying to capture what I'd seen. It became an obsession, consuming my free time and my thoughts. One night, about 6 months after my encounter, I was at home, poring over my research, when I heard a knock at the door. It was late, past midnight, and I wasn't expecting anyone. With a sense of dread, I approached the door, my hand reaching for the baseball bat I'd taken to keeping nearby. When I opened the door, my heart nearly stopped. It was the old man from the clearing, the one who had saved my life. He looked exactly the same, weathered face, steely eyes, rifle slung over his shoulder. Without a word, he pushed past me into my apartment. "You've been digging," he said, his eyes scanning the papers spread across my living room. It wasn't a question. "I told you we don't talk about these things." I stammered out a response, trying to explain myself, but he cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Sit down," he said. "You need to hear this." For the next few hours, the old man, who finally introduced himself as Frank, told me a story that was almost beyond belief. The creature I'd encountered wasn't alone. There were others, scattered throughout the most remote wilderness areas of the country. They were ancient, he said, here long before humans arrived. Frank was part of a group that had been tracking and hunting these creatures for generations. They worked in secret, keeping the existence of the monsters hidden from the world at large. "People aren't ready for this truth," he said. "It would change everything." As the night wore on, Frank's story became more detailed, more horrifying. He spoke of other encounters, other hunts, of the times they'd failed, of the lives lost. And he spoke of the creatures themselves, their intelligence, their ferocity, their seeming immortality. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked, as the first light of dawn began to creep through my windows. Frank fixed me with a hard stare. "Because you've seen it now. You're part of this whether you want to be or not, and we need all the help we can get." With that, he stood and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned back to me. "We'll be in touch," he said. "Be ready." And just like that, he was gone, leaving me with a head full of impossible knowledge and a decision to make. Did I want to be part of this secret war? Did I have a choice? In the days that followed, I wrestled with what Frank had told me. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as the ravings of a madman, but I couldn't. I'd seen the creature with my own eyes. I'd felt its breath on my face as it tried to reach me in that crevice. This was real, whether I wanted it to be or not. I thought about trying to forget it all, about destroying my research and trying to move on with my life. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those yellow eyes staring back at me. I heard the screams of that poor hiker being torn apart, and I knew I couldn't just walk away. A week after Frank's visit, I received a package in the mail. Inside was a burner phone and a set of coordinates. No note, no explanation. But I knew what it meant. It was time to make my choice. I'd like to say I hesitated, that I carefully weighed the pros and cons of what I was about to do. But the truth is, I think my decision had been made the moment I saw that creature in the forest. I packed a bag, called in sick to work, and set out for the coordinates. What I found there was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. Frank was there, along with a handful of others, men and women of all ages, all with the same haunted look in their eyes that I saw in the mirror every day. They were hunters, trackers, researchers, all dedicated to fighting a war that the rest of the world knew nothing about. Over the next few years, I became one of them. I learned to track the creatures, to recognize the signs of their presence. I learned to fight, to shoot, to survive in ways I never thought possible. And I learned the true scope of what we were up against. The creatures, we called them shadows, were more numerous and more widespread than I'd ever imagined. They weren't just in the Trinity Alps. They were in the deep forests of the Pacific Northwest, the remote mountains of Alaska, the dense swamps of the South. Anywhere that humans rarely ventured, the shadows lurked. We fought them where we could, protected people when possible, and always kept the secret. It wasn't easy. We lost people, good people, brave people. And for every shadow we took down, it seemed like two more took its place. But we kept fighting, because we knew the alternative. We'd all seen what happened when the shadows were left unchecked. We'd all stood in clearings like the one I'd found, surrounded by the bones of their victims. Now, years later, I find myself back where it all began. The Trinity Alps stretch out before me. The forest as silent and foreboding as it was that day in 1998. But this time, I'm not alone. This time, I'm prepared. As I stand here, rifle in hand, waiting for night to fall, I can't help but think back to the person I was before all this started. The naive hiker who thought he knew the wilderness, who thought he was alone out here. I know better now. We're never alone out here. And the real monsters? They're not the ones in campfire stories or horror movies. They're out there in the darkness waiting, always waiting. But so are we. And as long as there are shadows in the night, we'll be here to face them, because someone has to. Because if we don't, Who will? The sun is setting now, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Soon the hunt will begin again, and I'll be ready. Because this is my life now, this is my purpose. This is the story that no one talks about. The war that no one knows is being fought. And it all started here, in the Trinity Alps, on a quiet autumn day in 1998. As I take my position, checking my weapon one last time, I can't help but smile grimly. I've always been terrible at following advice, and I'm about to break the biggest rule of all. I'm going to talk about it. Because people need to know. They need to be prepared. They need to understand that the world is bigger, darker, and more dangerous than they ever imagined. So listen closely, and whatever you do, don't go into the woods alone, because you never know what might be waiting for you in the shadows. The late September wind carried a hint of decay as I packed the last of my gear into the RV. At 30, Gabriela Vargas, had made a career of designing architectural marvels in the city, but my heart always belonged to the wilderness. This trip was more than just an escape. It was a ritual of sorts, a way to reconnect with something primal and untamed. Jimmy Rader's laugh crackled through my phone. "You're seriously asking me to take time off work for another one of your wilderness adventures?" His tone was playful, but I knew he'd say yes. We'd been friends since high school, bonded by a shared love of the outdoors and an ability to find humor in almost any situation. "Come on," I replied. "When was the last time you saw something truly wild? Not the sanitized version of nature most people experience." There was a pause, then his characteristic chuckle. "You had me at wild. I'm in." Our mutual friend Mark Crowley lived near Elk Ridge, a small, almost forgotten town nestled in the western Virginia mountains. He knew the terrain like the back of his hand, and had been sending me cryptic messages about an area he wanted to show us, a place off the beaten path, as he liked to say. As I reviewed my maps, something about Elk Ridge seemed to whisper, not with words, but with an unsettling sense of anticipation. The topographical lines seemed to curl like fingers. The forest boundaries looked less like boundaries and more like teeth. Little did I know how prophetic that feeling would become. The drive to Elk Ridge was a gradual descent into wilderness. Modern civilization peeled away mile by mile. First the highway, then the country roads, and finally a barely maintained gravel path that seemed more suggestion than actual road. My RV, a sturdy 25-foot Winnebago, navigated the terrain with surprising grace. Jimmy rode shotgun, his usual jovial demeanor slightly muted by the increasing isolation. "You sure about this spot, Gabs?" he asked, scanning the dense forest that seemed to press against the windows. "Mark recommended it," I responded, though even I felt the weight of the surrounding wilderness. Mark Crowley was waiting for us at a predetermined coordinate, a clearing just inside the forest's edge. He looked different, leaner, more weathered than when I'd last seen him. His eyes held the intensity that spoke of someone who had spent too much time alone in places most people wouldn't dare explore. "Not much cell service here," Mark said by way of greeting, tossing a cooler into the RV. "Better get used to being disconnected." The area was beautiful in a way that defied simple description. The trees were ancient, their trunks wide and gnarled, creating a canopy that seemed to swallow light. Autumn was beginning to paint the leaves in burnt oranges and deep crimsons, but there was something off about the colors. They seemed too rich, almost like bruises against the dark bark. We set up camp as the afternoon light began to fade, each of us moving with the practiced efficiency of experienced outdoors people. Jimmy told jokes, Mark prepared food, and I organized our equipment. But underneath the routine, a tension hummed, like a distant, barely perceptible electrical current. Night fell quickly in Elk Ridge. The darkness wasn't the gentle dimming one might expect, but a sudden absolute blackness that seemed to press against the RV's windows. Our campfire cast flickering shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. The first sound came around midnight, a rustling that was too deliberate to be animal, too rhythmic to be random. Mark went silent, his hand instinctively moving to a hunting knife at his belt. Jimmy's perpetual smile faded. "Probably just a deer," Jimmy said, but his voice lacked conviction. The sound continued, a methodical movement just beyond the firelight. Something was watching us, not observing, not curious, but calculating. Mark spoke quietly. We should be careful. These woods, they're not like other forests. If only we had listened. The next morning we hiked to an old lookout point Mark knew about. The trail was overgrown, clearly unused for years. Thorny branches seemed to reach out, catching at our clothing, our skin. The abandoned cabin we discovered was a testament to forgotten times. Its wooden structure was weathered, with a roof partially collapsed, and windows like blind eyes staring into the forest. The door hung askew, creaking with each breath of wind. Inside, the walls were covered with strange markings, symbols that predated any known language, intricate, disturbing patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Jimmy took photographs, his usual humor replaced by a nervous energy. "These look old," he muttered. "Really old." Mark's expression was unreadable. "Some things are better left undisturbed," he said cryptically. Little did we know how prophetic those words would become. The attacks became more calculated with each passing night. What began as simple rustling evolved into something more sinister. We discovered tracks around our campsite. Not quite human, not quite animal. Massive impressions in the soft forest floor, with elongated fingers and a stride that defied natural biomechanics. Mark began to change. His eyes grew harder, more distant. He spoke less, watched more. I caught him making strange preparations, collecting specific herbs from the surrounding forest, creating crude protective symbols using branches and twine. "The locals have stories," he told me one night, his voice low and careful. "Stories that go back generations. Before the settlers, before the native tribes. Something older." Jimmy tried to maintain his jovial attitude, but the fear was eating away at his humor. He'd jump at every sound, his hands constantly moving, fingers twitching nervously. On the fourth night, the first real attack came. It wasn't a creature that burst through the RV door or crashed through our windows. Instead, it was a calculated, terrifying manipulation of our environment. The temperature dropped suddenly, not a gradual cooling, but an immediate, bone-chilling plunge that felt unnatural. The RV's electrical systems began to fail. Lights flickered in patterns that seemed almost like communication. Our phones, those few that had any signal, began to display strange, fragmented images, distorted faces, symbols similar to those we'd seen in the abandoned cabin. Mark was the first to recognize the true nature of our situation. "It's hunting us," he whispered. "Not like a predator hunts prey. This is something else, something that plays with its victims." The name came to us through fragments, local legends, whispered stories passed down through generations. Zalith, a creature that wasn't just a beast, but a sentient force of ancient malevolence. The Native American tribes had known about it. The early settlers had warnings carved into trees and rocks. A predator that didn't simply kill, but consumed something deeper, something beyond physical existence. Mark's research became obsessive. He showed me documents, fragmented historical accounts, anthropological studies that hinted at something beyond conventional understanding. Zalith wasn't just a creature, it was a concept, a hunger that existed between reality and nightmare. "It chooses," Mark explained, his voice trembling. "It doesn't just hunt randomly. It selects its victims with a purpose we can't comprehend." The symbols we'd found were more than just markings. They were a language, a warning, a map of something ancient and terrifying. Jimmy was the first to vanish. One moment he was there, helping me secure our campsite, making some joke about bears and camping safety. The next, complete absence. No sound of struggle, no indication of what happened, just gone. We searched. Mark and I combed every inch of the surrounding forest. The local authorities were called, but their search was half-hearted. They knew something about Elk Ridge, something they weren't willing to discuss openly. His car was found miles away, perfectly parked on a remote forest road. No signs of trauma, no indication of what had happened, just empty, like Jimmy had been erased from existence. Months passed. The investigation went nowhere. Jimmy's family oscillated between grief and hope, unable to accept the complete absence of answers. Mark became obsessed. He continued researching, collecting more information about Zalith. I tried to move on, but the experience had fundamentally changed me. The RV remained in storage, a physical reminder of that nightmare. Sometimes in the dead of night, I would hear a tapping, rhythmic, deliberate, always just at the edge of perception. Tap, tap, tap. And I would remember Elk Ridge, I would remember Jimmy, and I would wonder if Zalith was still watching, still waiting, still hunting. The years following Jimmy's disappearance consumed me in ways I never anticipated. What began as a traumatic camping trip transformed into an all-consuming investigation that threatened to unravel my entire life. Mark Crowley became a ghost, literally and figuratively. He disappeared for months at a time, returning with journals filled with cryptic notes, maps marked with strange symbols, and a haunted look that spoke of things no human was meant to understand. His research into Zalith went beyond academic curiosity. It was a desperate attempt to comprehend something fundamentally incomprehensible. I hired private investigators, pored through local historical records, and interviewed anyone who would listen. The town of Elk Ridge seemed to exist in a perpetual state of collective denial. Locals would change the subject whenever I mentioned the forest, the disappearances, or the ancient legends. One detective, a grizzled veteran named Robert Hernandez, was the only one who showed genuine interest. "There's something wrong with that forest," he told me during one of our late-night meetings. "I've seen missing person cases before, but nothing like this. It's like people don't just disappear, they're extracted." My research uncovered fragments of a much older story. The native tribes that originally inhabited the region spoke of Zalith not as a creature, but as a force, a hunger that existed between dimensions. Archaeological records suggested ritualistic sites deep in the forest, places where boundaries between our reality and something else grew thin. An elderly local historian, Elena Rodriguez, broke her decades-long silence when I showed her the symbols we'd discovered. Her hands trembled as she traced the intricate markings. "These are older than any language," she whispered. "They're a warning, a containment spell. The old tribes knew something lived in those woods, something that wasn't meant to be disturbed." She told me stories passed down through generations, tales of hunters who ventured too deep, of entire hunting parties that vanished without a trace. The forest wasn't just a place. It was a living entity that selected its victims with a terrifying intelligence. Against every rational instinct, Mark and I decided to return to the exact location where Jimmy disappeared. We were different now, hardened by years of searching, equipped with technology and knowledge our previous selves could never have imagined. We brought ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging cameras, multiple communication devices, and enough survival gear to outfit a military expedition. The forest seemed to watch our preparation, the trees standing like silent sentinels. Our first night back was unlike anything we'd experienced before. The technological equipment went haywire, not just malfunctioning, but displaying impossible readings. Thermal cameras would show massive heat signatures that would vanish instantly. Communication devices picked up fragmented transmissions that sounded like a language no human tongue could produce. It was Mark who found the first real evidence. Hidden deep in a ravine, barely visible beneath decades of forest growth, we discovered a series of underground chambers. The walls were covered in the same symbols we'd seen years ago. But here, they seemed to move, to breathe. Scattered throughout the chambers were personal effects: a watch, a torn photograph, a child's shoe, artifacts from decades of disappearances, preserved as if time itself had stopped. But the most terrifying discovery was a massive stone structure at the chamber's center. It wasn't a monument or a marker. It was more like a gateway. Intricate carvings suggested it was a portal, a thin membrane between our reality and something else. Zalith wasn't a creature in the traditional sense. It was a predatory consciousness, a hunting intelligence that existed beyond our understanding of physics or biology. It didn't just kill. It consumed entire existences, selecting victims with a precision that suggested something closer to mathematical calculation than animal instinct. As we stood in that underground chamber, we realized Jimmy's disappearance was part of a larger pattern, a selection process we could barely comprehend. Mark began to recite an incantation from one of his research journals, words in a language that seemed to vibrate the very air around us. The symbols on the walls began to pulse with an unearthly light. We never fully discovered what happened to Jimmy. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, they're meant to be respected. Mark continued his research, becoming more isolated with each passing year. I returned to my architectural practice, but the experience fundamentally changed me. The world seemed different, thinner, more fragile. Sometimes late at night I would hear a familiar tapping, a rhythmic sound that existed just at the edge of perception, a reminder that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. Zalith was still out there, waiting, watching, hunting. Some forests keep their secrets, and some secrets are better left undisturbed. 20 years after that fateful camping trip, I received a package, no return address. Inside was Jimmy's watch, perfectly preserved as if no time had passed, and a single sheet of paper with a message written in a language I couldn't understand. But the symbols were familiar, very familiar. I've always been drawn to the wilderness, finding solace in its raw beauty and unpredictability. Growing up in rural Montana shaped not just my career as a wildlife photographer and occasional hunting guide, but my entire worldview. The locals knew me as the quiet guy who spent more time in the woods than in town, though few understood my true purpose. For 15 years I'd been methodically documenting the strange occurrences in these forests, building a catalog of inexplicable phenomena that most people would dismiss as imagination or folklore. My background in environmental science and 3 tours as a Marine Corps Scout sniper gave me the perfect combination of skills for this work: the patience to observe, the training to survive, and the discipline to question everything. The incident that would change everything began on an unusually warm October morning. I'd been tracking reports of strange animal behavior in the Flathead National Forest. Deer moving in perfectly synchronized groups, birds falling silent at precise times of day, and most intriguingly, a series of perfectly circular clearings where nothing would grow. My research partner, Cal Peterson, had written these off as natural phenomena, but 20 years of experience told me something else was going on. The patterns were too precise, too deliberate to be random occurrences of nature. Planning for extended forest excursions had become second nature, but this trip required special consideration. The weather forecast predicted clear skies, but my instruments told a different story. The electromagnetic field readers I'd modified, based on Dr. Chen's specifications, were showing unusual spikes in activity, correlating perfectly with the lunar cycle and local magnetic anomalies. I packed accordingly: standard survival gear, my customized long-range camera equipment, and several prototype sensors designed to detect the kind of energy signatures we'd been studying. The night before departure, I meticulously checked every piece of equipment. My old Marine Corps habits died hard. Everything had its place. Every contingency had a plan. The satellite phone was fully charged, though past experience suggested it would be useless if I encountered what I was looking for. I laid out my topographical maps, marking the locations of previous incidents and the patterns they formed. When connected, they created a perfect geometric shape, with tomorrow's destination at its center. Dawn broke with an eerie stillness that even the local wildlife seemed to notice. The usual morning chorus of birds was conspicuously absent as I parked my truck at the unmarked trailhead. The air felt charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm, but the sky remained clear. My first readings came within minutes of starting the hike. Subtle electromagnetic disturbances that wouldn't have been noticeable without Dr. Chen's modified equipment. The deeper I went into the forest, the stronger they became. The old-growth forest seemed to shift and change as I walked, the trees growing more twisted and ancient with each mile. These weren't the same woods I'd grown up in. Something about them felt fundamentally wrong, as if they existed slightly out of sync with the rest of the world. The shadows seemed to move independently of their sources, and distances became difficult to judge. My GPS unit started showing impossible coordinates, placing me simultaneously in multiple locations hundreds of miles apart. The first concrete evidence came around midday, a perfect circle of dead vegetation, 30 feet in diameter, lay in a clearing that shouldn't have existed according to my maps. The ground within the circle was covered in a strange phosphorescent moss that seemed to pulse with its own internal light. My instruments were going haywire, registering energy patterns that Dr. Chen had theorized about, but never actually observed in the field. As I collected samples and took readings, the air temperature began to drop precipitously. Within minutes, my breath was visible, and frost started forming on my equipment despite the afternoon sun. The silence became absolute, creating a pressure in my ears that made it difficult to focus. That's when I first heard it, a low, pulsing hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. What began as scientific curiosity quickly evolved into something far more unsettling as I ventured deeper into the anomalous zone. The electromagnetic readings continued to spike at regular intervals, forming a pattern that corresponded precisely with the lunar tables Dr. Chen had compiled over the past decade. The forest itself seemed to be undergoing subtle but measurable changes. The trees appeared to grow more twisted and ancient with each passing hour, their bark developing intricate patterns that defied botanical classification. My atmospheric sensors detected increasing levels of unknown particulate matter in the air, accompanied by fluctuations in local gravity that should have been impossible according to conventional physics. The deeper I pressed into the woods, the more the very fabric of reality seemed to thin, creating discrepancies in my measurements that would have frustrated a less experienced researcher. Time itself began to behave strangely. My chronometer showed regular jumps forward and backward, though my own biological clock remained steadily aligned with the position of the sun overhead. The actual encounter occurred at precisely 3:47 p.m., according to my last functioning piece of electronic equipment. The humming that had been building throughout the day reached a fever pitch, causing visible distortions in the air that resembled heat waves but behaved according to no known atmospheric principles. The clearing where I found myself was approximately 50 meters in diameter, perfectly circular, and contained the strongest concentration of anomalous readings I had ever recorded. The ground was covered in that same phosphorescent moss I'd observed earlier, but here it formed complex geometric patterns that seemed to shift and reorganize themselves when viewed peripherally. The air temperature had dropped to -15 degrees Celsius despite the afternoon sun, and ice crystals formed and dissipated in impossible patterns around me. The entity, when it appeared, did so without warning or dramatic entrance. One moment the clearing was empty, and the next it was simply there, as if it had always been present, and my mind was only now capable of perceiving it. The creature, though that term fails to capture the true nature of what I witnessed, defied conventional description. It stood approximately 3 meters tall, though its height seemed to fluctuate as it moved. Its form appeared to exist in more dimensions than our space typically allows, with appendages that moved through impossible angles and surfaces that reflected light from sources that didn't exist. The closest analogy I can provide is that of a 4-dimensional object casting a 3-dimensional shadow, but even this fails to capture the true complexity of its appearance. The entity's surface displayed constantly shifting patterns of bioluminescence that corresponded exactly with the electromagnetic fluctuations my equipment had been recording, suggesting some form of communication or perhaps a manifestation of its thought processes. Its movements followed a precise mathematical pattern that Dr. Chen would later identify as corresponding to certain quantum mechanical principles we're only beginning to understand. The communication, when it began, bypassed traditional sensory channels entirely. Rather than producing sound waves or visual signals, the entity seemed to interface directly with my consciousness, transmitting complex packets of information that my brain struggled to decode into comprehensible concepts. The experience was simultaneously terrifying and enlightening, like having entire libraries of alien knowledge poured directly into my mind. The information revealed a universe far more complex than our current scientific understanding suggests, one where the barriers between dimensions are permeable, and what we consider reality is merely one layer of an infinitely complex system of interconnected planes of existence. The entity conveyed that it was part of a vast network of similar beings, all engaged in a long-term study of our reality. Our world, it seemed, was one of countless others they monitored, though their purpose remained unclear, whether purely scientific or part of some larger cosmic agenda. that my human mind couldn't fully grasp. The immediate aftermath of the encounter left me with severe physiological and psychological effects that persisted for weeks. My body showed signs of exposure to types of radiation unknown to current science, and my brain scans revealed patterns of activity that baffled neurologists. The most significant changes, however, were to my fundamental understanding of reality. The entity had transferred vast amounts of information directly into my consciousness. Mathematical equations that solved problems our greatest physicists haven't even conceived yet. Concepts that connected quantum mechanics with gravity in ways that revolutionized our understanding of both. And perhaps most importantly, proof that we are not alone in the universe, though the truth is far stranger than anyone had imagined. The government agencies that eventually became involved approached the situation with a mixture of skepticism and intense interest, though their efforts to suppress the information proved futile, given the physical evidence I'd managed to preserve and the network of researchers I had already established. In the months following the initial encounter, our research team expanded to include specialists from various scientific disciplines, each bringing unique insights to our investigation. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a quantum physicist from MIT, developed new theoretical frameworks to explain the dimensional anomalies we'd observed, while Dr. James Chen refined his electromagnetic detection equipment based on the data we'd gathered. The most significant breakthrough came from Dr. Sarah Hammond, a neurobiologist specializing in consciousness studies, who discovered that the entity's method of communication had permanently altered the neural pathways in my brain, creating new connections that allowed for enhanced pattern recognition and the ability to perceive aspects of reality previously invisible to human consciousness. The government's involvement, though initially confrontational, evolved into a cautious partnership after similar encounters were reported across multiple continents. A classified task force operating under the codename Project Threshold was established to coordinate research efforts and monitor the growing number of dimensional intersection points we'd identified. Through careful analysis of historical records and cross-referencing of global anomaly reports, we began to understand that what we'd discovered was part of a vast, ancient network of dimensional gateways. These intersections, marked by distinctive geological and electromagnetic signatures, formed a complex geometric pattern across the Earth's surface. Carbon dating of organic materials found at these sites suggested they had been actively used for at least 12,000 years, though their true age might be far greater. Indigenous peoples across the world, we discovered, had long known of these places, incorporating them into their spiritual practices and oral histories. The geometric patterns formed by these sites corresponded precisely with certain astronomical alignments and Earth's magnetic field fluctuations, suggesting a level of architectural planning on a planetary scale that defied conventional explanation. Most intriguingly, we found that these sites exhibited increased activity during specific astronomical events, particularly during solar eclipses and certain planetary alignments, indicating a possible connection between cosmic phenomena and dimensional permeability. The most profound implications of our discoveries emerged not from the physical evidence we'd gathered, but from the philosophical and existential questions they raised about humanity's place in the cosmos. The entities, we learned, existed in a state of consciousness so fundamentally different from our own that concepts like individual identity or linear time had little meaning to them. They perceived reality as a unified whole, with past, present, and future existing simultaneously across multiple dimensions. Their interest in our world seemed to stem from a genuine curiosity about conscious beings who experience reality in a linear, three-dimensional way. Through continued indirect communication and careful study of the artifacts they occasionally left behind, we began to understand that their presence wasn't meant to be threatening or invasive, but rather educational. They were, in essence, cosmic anthropologists, studying the development of consciousness across multiple realities and dimensions. The implications of this understanding led to dramatic advances in various scientific fields, from quantum physics to neurobiology, though many of these discoveries remained classified under international security protocols. 5 years have passed since that first encounter in the woods, and our understanding of these phenomena continues to evolve. The research facility we established near the original site has documented over 300 distinct interactions with extra-dimensional entities, each providing new insights into the nature of consciousness and reality. The government's involvement has become more structured and transparent, with international cooperation replacing the initial impulse toward secrecy. While public knowledge of these discoveries remains limited, a gradual disclosure process has begun, carefully managed to prevent societal disruption while preparing humanity for a dramatic expansion of its cosmic awareness. The forest where it all began has been designated as a restricted research area, though the entities seem to respect our need to study them as much as we respect their inscrutable purposes. The original clearing remains active, serving as a sort of informal embassy between our world and theirs, though the nature of the communication has evolved into something more structured and predictable. The transformative effects of that first encounter continue to ripple through my life and the lives of those involved in the research. The enhanced neural pathways created by the initial contact have stabilized, providing insights and perceptual abilities that have revolutionized our understanding of consciousness itself. Dr. Chen's theories about dimensional intersections have been largely validated, though the full implications of his work are still being understood. The military applications that some initially feared have given way to more constructive approaches, focused on understanding and learning from these entities, rather than attempting to control or exploit their capabilities. Perhaps most significantly, our continued interaction with these beings has begun to shift humanity's collective perspective about its place in the cosmos. We are not alone in the universe, but the truth is far more complex and wonderful than anyone had imagined. The woods where this all began remain a place of mystery and discovery, but now they represent something more, a doorway to understanding our place in a reality far vaster and more intricate than we ever dreamed possible. The crisp autumn air nipped at my face as I trudged through the fallen leaves, my two loyal companions, Rusty and Bella, trotting ahead, their tails wagging with unbridled enthusiasm. It was October 15th, 2023, and at 34 years old, I had settled into a comfortable routine of walking my dogs through Whispering Pines, a small forested area not far from my suburban home. Whispering Pines had always been a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the hustle and bustle of daily life seemed to fade away, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird. The forest wasn't large by any means, but its dense foliage and winding paths made it feel like an oasis of nature amidst the sprawling suburbia. As we ventured deeper into the woods that day, I couldn't shake an odd feeling that had been gnawing at me since we entered the forest. The air felt heavier somehow, and the usual sounds of the forest seemed muted, as if the very trees were holding their breath. Rusty, my robust German shepherd, suddenly halted, his ears perked up and alert. Bella, the smaller but equally fierce border collie, followed suit. Their sudden stillness sent a chill down my spine. "What is it, guys?" I asked, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the eerie silence. As if in response, Rusty let out a sharp bark that echoed through the trees. Before I could react, both dogs bolted, disappearing into a thick cluster of bushes ahead. "Rusty, Bella, come back," I called out, my heart racing as I sprinted after them. The undergrowth tugged at my clothes as I pushed through, branches scratching my arms and face. The dogs' barking grew louder, more frantic, and I felt a growing sense of dread with each step. Suddenly I burst into a small clearing, and the sight before me made me freeze in my tracks. Rusty and Bella stood rigid, their hackles raised, staring intently at something partially hidden behind a massive, gnarled oak tree. As I approached, a foul odor assaulted my nostrils, a sickly sweet stench of decay that made my stomach churn. The air around us seemed to buzz, and as I drew closer I realized the sound was coming from a swarm of flies hovering around. Something. With trembling hands I reached for a fallen branch, using it to push aside the tall grass that obscured my view. What I uncovered made my blood run cold. There, nestled against the base of the oak, was a large burlap sack, roughly the size of a person. It was bound tightly with thick frayed rope, and dark stains had seeped through the fabric in places. The flies swarmed around it in a frenzy, and I could see maggots writhing in the dampened earth beneath. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A dead animal, perhaps? But why would someone go to the trouble of bagging it up like this? And why leave it here, in the middle of whispering pines? I took a step closer, fighting against the urge to retch as the stench intensified. Using the branch, I gingerly prodded the sack. The contents shifted slightly, and a fresh wave of flies erupted from within, their angry buzzing filling the air. Something about the shape, the size, it struck a chord of primal fear within me. This was no animal. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I staggered backward, my heart pounding in my chest. "Come on, guys," I choked out, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to go, now." Rusty and Bella seemed reluctant to leave, their eyes fixed on the grotesque bundle. I had to tug at their collars to get them moving, and even then they kept looking back, low growls rumbling in their throats. As we hurried back along the path, my mind was a whirlwind of horrific possibilities. Should I call the police? But what if I was wrong? What if it really was just some animal and I ended up looking like a fool? The rational part of my brain argued that even if it was an animal, leaving a rotting carcass in a public forest was still cause for concern. But another part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, just wanted to forget what I'd seen and never return to that clearing again. By the time we emerged from Whispering Pines, my clothes were damp with sweat despite the cool air. I glanced back at the forest's edge, half expecting to see someone or something watching us. But there was nothing except the gently swaying trees and the lengthening shadows of late afternoon. That night, as I lay in bed, the image of that burlap sack haunted my thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it there, nestled against the oak tree, imagining what horrors it might contain. Sleep eluded me, and when I did finally drift off in the early hours of the morning, my dreams were filled with buzzing flies and the sickly sweet smell of decay. A week passed, but the memory of what I'd discovered in Whispering Pines refused to fade. It lingered in the back of my mind, an insidious presence that colored every aspect of my daily life. I found myself jumping at sudden noises, eyeing strangers with suspicion, and waking up in cold sweats, the phantom smell of decay clinging to my nostrils. I tried to go about my routine as normal, going to work at the local library, meeting friends for coffee, walking Rusty and Bella in the neighborhood park. But no matter what I did, my thoughts inevitably circled back to that clearing in the woods and the mysterious, horrifying sack. On October 22nd, exactly 1 week after the initial discovery, I found myself standing at the edge of Whispering Pines once again. The autumn sun was sinking low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the leaf-strewn ground. A chill wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the musty scent of decaying foliage. "This is insane," I muttered to myself, even as I took my first tentative steps into the forest. I had left Rusty and Bella at home this time, not wanting to risk them running off again or drawing attention to me. As I made my way deeper into the woods, following the now familiar path, every snapping twig and rustling leaf set my nerves on edge. The forest seemed different now, no longer the peaceful retreat I once knew. The trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, and shadows danced at the corners of my vision. Finally, I reached the clearing. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the spot where I had found the sack. But as I drew closer, I realized something was different. The sack was gone. In its place was a shallow pit, partially filled with loose soil. The ground around it was disturbed, with drag marks leading away from the site before disappearing into the underbrush. I stood there, frozen, as a myriad of emotions washed over me, relief, confusion, and a growing sense of dread. Someone had been here. Someone had moved the sack and attempted to cover their tracks. Cautiously, I approached the pit, my eyes scanning the area for any clues. The foul odor still lingered, though it was fainter now, mingling with the earthy smell of freshly turned soil. As I knelt down to examine the pit more closely, something caught my eye. A glint of white against the dark earth. With trembling fingers, I brushed away some of the loose soil, revealing what appeared to be a small bone. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it was a human finger bone, stripped clean of flesh. I scrambled backward, my heart racing. This was no longer something I could ignore or rationalize away. I had to call the police. But as I fumbled for my phone, a twig snapped somewhere behind me. I whirled around, my eyes wide with fear, scanning the deepening shadows between the trees. Was someone watching me? Had they been here all along, waiting to see if I would return? "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is someone there?" Only the whisper of the wind through the leaves answered me. But I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes upon me, hidden somewhere in the growing darkness of the forest. I backed away from the pit, my gaze darting from tree to tree, searching for any sign of movement. As the shadows lengthened and the forest grew darker, my imagination ran wild. Every tree trunk became a potential hiding place, every rustle of leaves a footstep drawing near. When I finally reached the edge of the forest, I broke into a run, not stopping until I reached the safety of my car. As I sped home, my mind raced with questions. Who had moved the sack? Why had they left that bone behind? And most chillingly, were they watching me even now? That night, as I paced my living room, debating whether or not to call the police, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled onto something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. The bone I had found was undeniable proof that something terrible had happened in Whispering Pines. But as I reached for my phone, a new thought stopped me cold. What if whoever was responsible for this knew who I was? What if they had followed me home? I rushed to check that all my doors and windows were locked, drawing the curtains tight. Rusty and Bella sensed my unease, staying close by my side, their eyes alert for any sign of danger. As I lay in bed that night, every creak of the house and gust of wind outside had me on edge. I knew that come morning, I would have to make a decision. I could no longer pretend that what I had seen in Whispering Pines was anything but evidence of a horrific crime. The next few days passed in a haze of paranoia and sleepless nights. I went through the motions of my daily life, shelving books at the library, walking Rusty and Bella, buying groceries. But my mind was elsewhere, constantly replaying the gruesome discoveries in Whispering Pines. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that finger bone poking through the soil. Every sudden noise made me jump, convinced that whoever was responsible for the horrors in the forest had come for me. The rational part of my brain tried to argue that I was overreacting, that there was likely a logical explanation for everything, but the fear had taken root, growing like a malignant weed in the darkest corners of my mind. On October 25th, 3 days after my second visit to the clearing, I was working the evening shift at the library. The large Gothic-style building had always felt comforting to me, with its towering shelves of books and the musty scent of old paper. But now, as closing time approached and the shadows lengthened between the stacks, I found myself on edge. As I was reshelving books in the true crime section, an irony not lost on me, I heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching. I turned, expecting to see a late-night patron, but instead found myself face-to-face with Detective Hoffman, a gruff, middle-aged man I recognized from his frequent visits to the library's local history section. "Evening," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Doing some research on local cold cases. Mind if I pick your brain about something?" My heart rate spiked. Did he know something? Had someone reported the sack in the woods after all? Sure, I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "What can I help you with?" Detective Hoffman pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open. "Been looking into some missing persons cases from the area. Anything unusual happen around here lately? Any strange sightings or disturbances in the neighborhood?" I felt the blood drain from my face. This was my chance to tell someone in authority about what I had seen. But as I opened my mouth to speak, a chill ran down my spine. What if this wasn't a coincidence? What if Detective Hoffman was involved somehow? "No," I lied, hating myself for it. "Nothing unusual that I can think of." Hoffman's eyes narrowed slightly, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through me. "You sure about that? You seem a bit on edge." I forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Just tired, I guess. Been working a lot of late shifts lately." He nodded slowly, but I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, if you do hear anything, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem, you give me a call, all right?" He handed me his card, which I took with slightly trembling fingers. As Detective Hoffman walked away, I leaned against the bookshelf, my heart pounding. I had just lied to a police officer about potential evidence in what could be a murder case. What was wrong with me? But the seed of doubt had been planted. What if Hoffman wasn't really investigating? What if this was some sort of test to see if I would reveal what I knew? That night, as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every set of headlights in my rearview mirror seemed to stay there too long. Every car that passed me on the quiet suburban streets looked suspicious. When I finally reached my house, I sat in the driveway for several long minutes, scanning the street for any signs of surveillance. The neighborhood was quiet, with only the occasional bark of a dog or the distant hum of traffic breaking the silence. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me and checking all the windows. Rusty and Bella greeted me with their usual enthusiasm, but even their presence couldn't fully ease my growing sense of dread. As I prepared for bed, a movement outside my bedroom window caught my eye. I froze, my heart in my throat, as I saw a shadowy figure dart between the trees at the edge of my backyard. It was there for only a moment before disappearing into the darkness, but it was enough to send me into a panic. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bed, Rusty and Bella on either side of me, jumping at every creak of the house settling and every gust of wind outside. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Was it the killer coming to silence me? Was it Detective Hoffman, suspicious of my behavior at the library? Or was it all in my imagination, a product of my growing paranoia? As the first light of dawn began to creep through my curtains, I made a decision. I couldn't go on like this. I needed answers, and there was only one place I was going to find them. I was going back to Whispering Pines. The morning of October 26th dawned gray and overcast, a fitting backdrop for the grim task that lay ahead. I had called in sick to work, knowing I wouldn't be able to focus on anything but the mystery that had consumed my life. As I prepared to return to Whispering Pines, I tried to convince myself that I was being rational, that I was simply gathering information to take to the authorities. But deep down, I knew this was about more than just doing the right thing. It had become an obsession, a dark compulsion that I couldn't ignore. I dressed in dark clothes, hoping to blend in with the forest surroundings. In my backpack, I packed a flashlight, a small shovel, and my phone, though I doubted I'd have much signal once I was deep in the woods. As an afterthought, I slipped Detective Hoffman's card into my pocket, just in case. Rusty and Bella whined as I prepared to leave, sensing my anxiety. I knelt down to pet them, trying to draw comfort from their warm fur and unconditional love. "I'll be back soon," I promised, hoping it wasn't a lie. The drive to Whispering Pines was tense, my knuckles white on the steering wheel as I constantly checked my rearview mirror for any signs of being followed. The forest loomed ahead, a wall of muted greens and browns under the overcast sky. As I parked at the small lot near the trailhead, a light drizzle began to fall, as if the very heavens were warning me to turn back. But I couldn't. Not now. I had come too far. The forest was different in the daylight, but no less menacing. The trees seemed to close in around me as I made my way deeper into the woods, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers trying to hold me back. The soft patter of rain on leaves created a constant, unsettling white noise that set my nerves on edge. I found the clearing easily enough, too easily perhaps. The disturbed earth around the shallow pit was now muddy from the rain, but I could still make out the drag marks leading away from the site. Taking a deep breath, I unshouldered my backpack and took out the small shovel. My hands trembled as I began to dig, each scoop of earth revealing nothing. No more bones, no scraps of burlap. Nothing to confirm the horrors I had witnessed. Had I imagined it all? Was I losing my mind? As I straightened up, wiping mud from my hands, a twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, my heart pounding, to find myself face to face with Detective Hoffman. "Funny running into you here," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Especially after you told me you hadn't seen anything unusual." I opened my mouth to explain, to apologize, but no words came out. Hoffman's eyes darted to the freshly dug earth, then back to me. His hand moved slowly towards his holster. "I think you'd better come with me," he said. "We have a lot to talk about." As he reached for my arm, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the forest, causing both of us to freeze. It was followed by another, closer this time, accompanied by the sound of something large crashing through the underbrush. What happened next was a blur of motion and terror. A figure burst from the trees. No, not a figure, a thing. It was vaguely humanoid, but its proportions were all wrong, its limbs too long and joints bending in impossible ways. Its skin was a patchwork of different shades and textures, as if it had been stitched together from multiple bodies. Hoffman drew his gun, firing off 2 shots that seemed to have no effect. The creature lunged, its elongated fingers wrapping around the detective's throat. I stood paralyzed with fear as Hoffman's screams were cut short by a sickening crack. The creature's head swiveled towards me, revealing a face that was a nightmarish collage of mismatched features. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. I ran. I crashed through the forest, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. Behind me I could hear the creature in pursuit, its inhuman shrieks growing closer with each passing second. Somehow I made it to my car. As I fumbled with the keys, I caught a glimpse of the thing emerging from the tree line, its misshapen body moving with an unnatural, loping gait. The engine roared to life and I sped away, tires screeching on the wet asphalt. In my rearview mirror I saw the creature retreat back into the forest, but its haunting cry echoed in my ears long after Whispering Pines had disappeared from view. The next few days passed in a haze of terror and disbelief. I barricaded myself in my house, jumping at every sound, convinced that the monstrosity from Whispering Pines would come for me at any moment. Rusty and Bella sensed my distress, staying close and growling at shadows. I knew I should call the police, report what had happened to Detective Hoffman, but who would believe me? A tale of stitched-together monsters and murdered detectives sounded insane even to my own ears, and a part of me feared that if I did reach out, I'd only be drawing attention to myself, attention from whatever sinister forces were behind the horrors in the forest. On the 3rd day of my self-imposed isolation, a knock at the door sent me into a panic. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole to see a woman in her mid-40s, with short graying hair and kind eyes. She knocked again, more insistently this time. "Hello?" she called out. "I'm looking for the person who lives here. It's about Detective Hoffman." My blood ran cold. Had they found his body? Were they here to arrest me? Against my better judgment, I opened the door a crack, the chain still in place. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice hoarse from disuse. "I'm Detective Reeves," she said, holding up a badge. "I'm investigating the disappearance of my partner, James Hoffman. He was last seen heading to Whispering Pines, and your name came up in his notes. May I come in?" I hesitated, my mind racing, but something in her eyes, a mixture of concern and determination, made me relent. I closed the door, removed the chain, and let her in. Detective Reeves took in the state of my living room, the drawn curtains, the empty takeout containers, the general air of paranoia, with a raised eyebrow. "You want to tell me what's going on?" she asked. And so, haltingly at first, then in a rush, I told her everything. The sack in the woods, the bone, my encounters with Hoffman, and finally the horrific events of that rainy day in the forest. As I spoke, I waited for her expression to change, for her to dismiss me as a lunatic or clap me in handcuffs. But she listened intently, her face growing more grave with each passing minute. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed heavily. "I was afraid of this," she said. You believe me?" I asked, incredulous. She nodded slowly. "There have been rumors, whispers of strange experiments, of people going missing, but nothing concrete, nothing we could act on, until now." "What do you mean?" Detective Reeves reached into her jacket and pulled out a small, battered notebook. Hoffman's, I realized. James had been investigating a series of disappearances. He thought they were connected to an old research facility on the outskirts of town, a place that was supposedly shut down years ago. She flipped through the pages, showing me hastily scribbled notes and rough sketches. One page caught my eye, a crude drawing of a figure with mismatched limbs and an impossibly wide mouth. "Oh God," I whispered. "He was getting close to something," Reeves continued. "Too close, apparently. And now?" She didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew what had happened to Detective Hoffman. "So what do we do now?" I asked, a mix of fear and determination coursing through me. Detective Reeves' eyes met mine, her gaze steely. "We finish what Hoffman started. We find out what's really going on in Whispering Pines, and we put a stop to it. Are you with me?" I thought of the horrors I had witnessed, of the lives that had been lost, of the nightmarish creature that still haunted my dreams. I thought of Detective Hoffman, who had died trying to uncover the truth. "I'm in," I said. The next few days were a whirlwind of covert meetings and clandestine investigations. Detective Reeves and I pored over Hoffman's notes, piecing together the fragments of his investigation. We discovered references to a company called Chimera Biotech, which had operated the research facility near Whispering Pines until it was supposedly shut down 5 years ago due to ethical concerns. But Hoffman's notes suggested the facility was still active, hidden away in the depths of the forest. He had been tracking shipments of unusual chemicals and specialized equipment, all leading to a remote area deep in Whispering Pines. On October 31st, Halloween fittingly enough, we decided it was time to act. We couldn't risk going through official channels. We had no idea how far the conspiracy reached, or who we could trust. It would be just the two of us, venturing into the heart of the nightmare. As night fell, Detective Reeves and I made our way into Whispering Pines. The forest seemed alive with malevolent energy, every shadow concealing potential horrors. We followed a faint trail that Hoffman had marked on his map, moving as quietly as we could through the underbrush. After what felt like hours of trekking through the darkness, we came upon a clearing. In the center stood a nondescript concrete building, its walls stained with age and overgrown with vines. A faint hum of machinery emanated from within, barely audible over the sounds of the forest. "This is it," Reeves whispered, her hand resting on her holstered gun. "Are you ready?" I nodded, though every instinct screamed at me to run. We approached the building cautiously, finding a heavy metal door with a keypad lock. Reeves pulled out a small device, borrowed from the police evidence locker, she'd said, and attached it to the keypad. After a tense minute, there was a soft beep, and the door clicked open. The interior of the facility was a stark contrast to its dilapidated exterior. Sterile white corridors stretched out before us, lit by harsh fluorescent lights. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and something else, a faint cloying odor that made my stomach churn. We moved silently through the hallways, checking rooms as we went. Most were empty labs or offices, but as we descended deeper into the facility, we began to hear noises, muffled screams, inhuman growls, and the occasional wet tearing sound that made my skin crawl. Finally, we came to a large set of double doors marked Primary Research. Reeves and I shared a look, both of us knowing that whatever lay beyond would change our lives forever. With a deep breath, we pushed the doors open. The scene that greeted us was straight out of a nightmare. The room was massive, filled with operating tables, strange machinery, and large, fluid-filled tanks. And in those tanks, I clapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. The tanks contained bodies, or parts of bodies, floating in a viscous, greenish liquid. Some were recognizably human, others weren't. Misshapen limbs, grotesquely enlarged organs, faces frozen in expressions of agony. "What the hell is this place?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Before Reeves could answer, a voice rang out from the other side of the room. "Ah, visitors, how delightful." We whirled around to see a man in a white lab coat step out from behind a bank of computers. He was tall and thin, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to glow in the harsh lighting. "Dr. Whitaker," Reeves growled, her gun trained on the man. "You're under arrest for—" "Oh, I don't think so," Whitaker interrupted, his voice eerily calm. "You see, you're trespassing in a very sensitive research facility, and I'm afraid I can't let you leave, at least not in your current form." As he spoke, shapes began to emerge from the shadows around us. I recognized the patchwork monster from the forest, along with several other abominations, each more horrifying than the last. "You see," Whitaker continued, a maniacal gleam in his eye, "we're on the brink of a breakthrough, the next stage of human evolution. And you'll make excellent test subjects." The creatures closed in, their misshapen limbs reaching for us. Reeves opened fire, her shots echoing in the cavernous room. I grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher, swinging it wildly at the nearest monster. What followed was a chaotic blur of violence and terror. We fought desperately, but we were outnumbered and outmatched. I saw Reeves go down, overwhelmed by a mass of writhing limbs. I felt claws tearing at my flesh, inhuman strength dragging me towards one of the empty tanks. As consciousness began to fade, my last sight was of Dr. Whitaker looming over me, a syringe filled with glowing green liquid in his hand. "Don't worry," he said, his voice distant and distorted. "Soon you'll be part of something greater." Then darkness claimed me, and I knew no more. I don't know how long I was unconscious. Time lost all meaning in the darkness, punctuated only by brief, agonizing moments of semi-awareness. Flashes of sterile rooms, the bite of scalpels, the burn of strange chemicals coursing through my veins. And always the pain, a constant, all-encompassing agony that seemed to reshape my very being. When I finally clawed my way back to full consciousness, I almost wished I hadn't. I found myself floating in one of the green-filled tanks, tubes and wires snaking into my body. But it wasn't my body anymore, not really. My limbs were elongated, joints bending at impossible angles. My skin was a patchwork of different textures and colors, surgical scars crisscrossing the uneven surface. And when I tried to scream, I felt rows of needle-sharp teeth scrape against a tongue that was far too long to be human. I thrashed in the tank, my new form moving with a horrible alien grace. The glass cracked, then shattered, spilling me onto the cold laboratory floor in a rush of viscous fluid. As I struggled to my feet, all four of them, I caught sight of my reflection in a nearby metal surface. The face that stared back at me was a nightmarish collage of mismatched features, barely recognizable as the person I once was. A low moan escaped my twisted lips, a sound of pure anguish and horror. What had they done to me? What had I become? The sound of slow applause drew my attention. Dr. Whitaker stood in the doorway, a look of triumphant madness on his face. "Magnificent," he breathed. "You're my greatest success yet. A perfect fusion of multiple genetic strands with enhanced strength, agility, and regenerative capabilities. You'll be the prototype for a new species, a species that will inherit the Earth." As he spoke, more of his creations emerged from the shadows, the patchwork horrors I had once feared, now my kin. Among them I recognized a twisted form that might once have been Detective Reeves, her face a mask of agony and rage. "You'll join your brethren soon enough," Whitaker continued. "Once your transformation is complete, once your old consciousness fades away entirely. For now, though, I think a field test is in order." He pressed a button on a small remote, and searing pain shot through my altered body. I roared in agony, my new form responding to commands I didn't understand. "Go," Whitaker said, his eyes gleaming with insane glee. "Go to Whispering Pines. Show the world what the future of humanity looks like." Against my will, I found myself moving, loping on all fours towards the exit. The other creatures followed, a pack of nightmares unleashed upon the unsuspecting world. As we burst out into the forest, a small part of my old self, buried deep beneath layers of mutated flesh and altered neurons, screamed in silent horror. What atrocities would I commit in this new form? How many innocent lives would be destroyed by Whitaker's insane vision? But those thoughts grew fainter with each passing moment, drowned out by new instincts and a hunger I couldn't comprehend. Days blurred into weeks as we prowled the depths of Whispering Pines. The forest, once a place of solace, had become our hunting ground. We moved like shadows in the night, striking terror into the hearts of those unfortunate enough to cross our path. But deep within the twisted mass of flesh and bone that I had become, a spark of my former self remained. It was a faint glimmer, easily overwhelmed by the primal urges that now dominated my existence, but it was there. And in rare moments of lucidity, I remembered who I was, what I had been. These moments often came in the quiet hours before dawn, when the forest was still, and the hunger that drove us temporarily sated. I would find myself drawn to the outskirts of town, to the home where I had once lived a normal life. From the shadows I watched as Rusty and Bella were walked by a new owner, their tails wagging happily. The sight brought a pang of something almost like grief to my mutated heart. One night, as we stalked the forest's edge, we came upon a group of campers. The other creatures moved in for the kill, but something made me hesitate. Among the terrified faces, I saw a child clutching a stuffed animal, a dog that looked remarkably like Rusty. In that moment, the last vestiges of my humanity surged to the forefront. With a roar that was equal parts pain and defiance, I turned on my monstrous brethren. The battle that ensued was savage and brutal, a chaos of slashing claws and gnashing teeth. I fought with a desperation born of the knowledge that this was my last chance at redemption. When it was over, the clearing was a scene of carnage. The other creatures lay dead or dying, their mismatched body parts twitching in the moonlight. The campers had fled, leaving behind their belongings in their haste to escape. Exhausted and wounded, I dragged myself back towards the secret facility. I knew what I had to do. The building was quiet as I entered, most of the staff having long since abandoned the project. Only Dr. Whitaker remained, driven by his mad vision to create a new world order. He looked up in surprise as I burst into his lab, a twisted smile spreading across his face. My masterpiece returns," he said, seemingly oblivious to my intentions. "Come to show me the fruits of your—" His words were cut short as I lunged, pinning him against the wall with inhuman strength. Terror filled his eyes as he realized his creations had turned against him. "Please," he gasped, "you don't understand. I was trying to save humanity, to elevate us to the next stage of evolution." But I was beyond words now. With a final, monstrous roar, I ended the life of the man who had destroyed so many others in pursuit of his insane goal. In the aftermath, as alarms blared and the facility began to self-destruct, a failsafe no doubt, I made my way to the heart of the complex. There, surrounded by bubbling vats of chemicals and humming machinery, I found what I was looking for, the central computer that contained all of Whitaker's research. With my mutated form, it was a simple matter to tear through the security measures and access the system. As the facility crumbled around me, I systematically erased every bit of data, every formula, every scrap of the madness that had led to this nightmare. Finally, as flames began to consume the lab, I stumbled out into the cool night air. The forest of whispering pines stretched out before me, no longer a place of terror, but a sanctuary where my monstrous form could hide from the world. I knew I could never return to my old life. The person I had been was gone, consumed by Whitaker's experiments. But perhaps in time, I could find a way to use this new form for good, to protect the innocence of the world from horrors they couldn't imagine. As dawn broke over the trees, casting the forest in a soft golden light, I retreated into the shadows. The nightmare of whispering pines was over, but for me, a new and uncertain future was just beginning. In the years that followed, whispered stories spread through the nearby towns, tales of a guardian creature that roamed the woods, frightening to behold but never harming the innocent. Some dismissed these as urban legends, campfire stories meant to frighten children. But for those who had encountered true horror in whispering pines, for those who remembered the night when monsters walked among us, these stories offered a glimmer of hope. They were a reminder that even in the darkest of circumstances, a spark of humanity could survive. And deep in the heart of the forest, watching over the land that had once been my home, I continued my solitary vigil. A monster in form perhaps, but with the heart of a protector. The last legacy of the terror that had once gripped whispering pines, and a silent promise that such horrors would never be allowed to rise again.